You each need to close that door. And you need to do it as soon as possible.
So here's the thing. You've seen it, I've seen it, everyone who has ever watched this show has seen it. Most people say that this season is the best one. They say it has the most episodes, it has the best episodes, and it has the best villains in the series. But is all that true? Is this actually the best season of the show? We're going to go through the entirety of season 3 and find out. Sometimes when I'm lurking in fan forums, I see people talking about this show and I see the things people say about season 3. They say it's unparalleled, they say it's the best thing on TV, and one person said they got married because of it. But what makes this season so dang good? Well, some people say it's all because of Styles, and while that's mostly true, I think it goes a little deeper than that. For the first time in the series, Teen Wolf really ups its budget. It moves production from Georgia to California because they're given a tax cut by the state of California, so they can put that money elsewhere. Plus, the episode count doubles from 12 episodes to 24. But instead of making one long season with a bunch of episodes, the showrunners decided to split the season in half and make each half its own contained storyline. They're connected, so ultimately it's just one season, but the first 12 episodes and the second 12 episodes are more or less self-contained. We even get a handful of new characters in the second half of the season, so we'll be splitting this in sort of half and including my usual season rundown in the middle of the video as well to cover all of the stuff from the first half. The production team dubbed the first half 3A and the second half 3B, so we'll be using those same distinctions here. Before we get started, I want to reiterate that this is in no way meant to replace the experience of watching the show. In the interest of time, I leave out pretty much every joke, and while I do go through what happens throughout the season, it's really just to set a record straight for what exactly happens before getting into the discussion. Plus, even if you've already seen the show, it can be a nice reminder because we all know how messed up the timeline of the show is. Still, especially when it comes to this season, I really do recommend watching them for yourself. If you're here more for discussion about characters or ships, be sure to take a look at the chapters to this video. We'll start with 3A and then do a quick break to cover some thoughts on the 12 episodes, and then we'll recap the rest of the season and give the final thoughts at the end. Alrighty, let's get into it. The first episode of Season 3 starts about 4 months after the end of Season 2. See, the first 2 seasons so far have all taken place during our main character's sophomore year of high school, which for any of you non-Americans like myself is just 10th grade. So this season picks up right before the start of their junior year, 11th grade. That means that all that shit with Peter and Kate and the Kanema and Gerard took place in about 1 year. During the summer break, Jackson decided he didn't want to deal with the constant murder in this town and moved to England. We haven't seen the last of him yet, but every single storyline he was going to have is cut off early and shuffled around to other characters. Since Colton Haynes got a role in the CW show Arrow, he was unavailable for filming this season, and the writers decided to do the merciful thing and let his character live. We'll come back to this way later. The first thing of Season 3 that we see is our favorite beta Isaac being shaken awake by a mysterious mercenary named Brayden. He's had his memory taken and has no idea where he is. This is convenient since we don't know either. She helps Isaac onto her motorcycle and they are immediately followed by some of the worst green screen I have ever seen in my life. After driving for what seems like forever in a single direction, they evade the shirtless twin alpha werewolves for a moment, only to fall off the bike. The twins merge into a gigantic alpha if you will, before being stopped by Brayden with some electricity. Elsewhere, Scott has decided to get a tattoo. According to the showrunner Jeff Davis, this was added into the show because Tyler Posey decided to get a prominent tattoo on his arm between seasons, and it would have been more of a hassle to cover it up every episode. Fortunately, it seems to fit Scott and he walks away with a nice armband. Unfortunately, his werewolf healing kicks in and the tattoo fades away. Guess all that time under the needle was for nothing. As they drive home, we switch cars to Lydia and Allison. Allison has been away in France for the 4 months and has just returned to town. Lydia encourages her to get back on the dating market, but before they can really entertain the idea, they see the boys in Styles' Jeep. Allison is not ready to see Scott again since their whole breakup at the end of the last season, so Lydia stepped on the gas. Of course, since nothing ever goes right for these characters, pretty soon after, a deer runs straight through the windshield of Lydia's car. Successfully escaping the Alpha twins, Isaac and Brayden end up in the Beacon Hills Hospital and run into Melissa McCall, who learns that Brayden needs to find the Alpha, but also learns she's not talking about Derek. She's talking about Scott. Later, our various leads all get ready to go back to school. Scott has been reading over the summer and plans to ace his classes. Allison is nervous about returning, and Lydia has been finding herself some new romantic options, but she's not committing herself to anyone just yet. Finally, she has the chance to stand on her own. Derek has just undergone his first age retcon, so even though he was supposed to be 19 a year ago, he's at minimum 23 now. Most people tend to work with the idea that he's about 25, but I hate all the age retconning they do, so I'll just pretend he's actually still just 20. It doesn't really change much of his actions, and it's just neater that way. Speaking of Derek, Scott decides that he wants to ask Derek about his tattoo, since Derek has a pretty big one on his back, and it obviously hasn't healed like Scott's did. But Stiles points out that since Erica and Boyd are still missing, that Derek has his hands full for now. Lydia and Allison talk again about rebounding from their ending relationships, and Lydia sets her sights on the hot twins that walk into school. Twins? I wonder where we might have seen those recently. Since this is a school, we do need to have some actual learning, so Allison goes to class with a new English teacher named Miss Blake, played by Hayley Webb. She's a standout part of this season, and she does a great job with this character. As she's starting her lesson, they see a huge flock of birds out the window and are quickly thrust into the setting of a Hitchcock film when they start breaking through the glass and pecking at the student. Back at the hospital, Isaac is prepped for surgery by a nurse who decided she didn't want to wear shoes in the hospital. In actuality, it's another alpha werewolf named Kali. She sedates Isaac and then goes to find and kill Brayden, but Brayden has already escaped the hospital. Scott shows up, called by his mom, and as he goes to help Isaac, he runs into a blind man in the elevator. There's no confrontation, but this is another one of our alpha villains for the season, Deucalion. After helping out the polite blind man, Scott sees yet another alpha werewolf wheeling Isaac away. This is Ennis. He's buff, and that's about it. Scott fights Ennis and quickly starts losing, but Derek shows up just in time to snark a one-liner and help him.
Aren't you supposed to be in school?
Scott and Derek take Isaac to the skeleton of the Hale House, where we learn that the county has taken possession of the home. It won't be much longer before the house is torn down, which is a shame because I like to bag on it whenever it appears. Derek gets to work helping Isaac with his wounds while explaining to Scott that the werewolf issue is none of his business and Derek can handle it. While they're there, Scott asks Derek for his help with the tattoo. Apparently the best way to get the tattoo to appear on a werewolf is to blast it with a blowtorch, so he pulls out the blowtorch he happens to have handy and gets to work on Scott's arm. Before leaving, Scott notices the new paint on the Hale House door and scratches it off to reveal the Alpha Pack symbol from the end of Season 2. This is when Derek reveals to Scott that there's a pack of alphas in town. 5 of them, actually. We know there's the blind man Deucalion, the shoeless woman Kali, the big buff Ennis, and the 2 twins Ethan and Aiden. They're all alphas, and Derek says they have Boyd and Erica. Brayden shows up at the school looking for Scott and runs into Allison and Lydia. She squeezes their arms very hard, leaving behind some marks before rushing off to the locker room where she's slashed up by Deucalion and the other alphas. Somehow she doesn't die here, but she does go away for the rest of 3A. Just as the episode ends, Lydia and Allison line up the bruises on their arms to reveal a symbol, though they don't put those pieces together. We, the audience, see the symbol on the ground of a strange building, and we see 2 people sitting and comforting each other. Boyd and Erica, perhaps? It's an excellent first episode for the season. I praised the pilot in Season 1 for introducing absolutely everything we need to understand the season, and this episode does almost all of that too. As usual, 3A has 2 main villains for our cast to deal with, and this episode introduces one of them excellently. We meet all 5 of the alphas in the Alpha Pack, and we get a sense of how dangerous they can be. They've already taken Boyd, Erica, and even Isaac, though he was rescued, and they've set themselves up at places like the school and the hospital, which are vital spots for our main characters. We don't get much of a hint about the second villain, though when we've gone through all of 3A, we do have a few moments that kind of link to the second villain in hindsight, so that's the only thing that really loses points for me here. Our new cast so far are all great, and I think all of the alphas do a great job of being menacing, while characters like Brayden and the new teacher Miss Blake round out the cast excellently. It's a shame to lose Jackson, especially since they went through so much work to save him last season, but rest assured we will see his storylines later on in the series. In the next episode, we pick up pretty soon after the previous episode, with Lydia and Allison looking at the marks on their arms. Allison thinks Scott might know what they mean. Scott is a little busy though, since he's tagging along with Stiles to the birthday party of one of his childhood friends, Heather. At the party, we see Danielle again, who you may remember is played by a fan of the show who won a contest to appear on it. The cast and crew had such a good time with her in her appearance in Season 2, and since she lives in California near where the show was filmed, they invited her back to be a recurring character this season. It's great, and her character is really fun. Upon their arrival, Heather immediately kisses Styles and invites him down to the basement to get some wine. She tells him that her birthday wish is to no longer be a virgin, and she wants Styles to be the one to do it with her. Unfortunately, Styles doesn't have a condom, so he leaves to go get one from the upstairs bathroom. While he's gone, Heather is attacked and taken by an unseen figure. Styles returns and thinks she changed her mind, completely unaware that his childhood friend is going to be listed with a red box at the end of this video. Meanwhile, Isaac is still missing his memories, so Derek and Peter do the whole claws in neck thing that Peter did back in season 1. It doesn't work very well, but Isaac does see blurry memories of Boyd, so they conclude that Isaac was successful at finding Boyd and Erica before he was captured by the Alphas. At school, Scott and Styles try to figure out why the Alphas would take Erica and Boyd in the first place. Styles' running theory is that they're trying to recruit Derek. During their lesson, Styles' dad shows up to tell Styles that Heather was reported missing since Styles saw her at the party. He panics about this to Scott, and neither one of them are able to figure out why the Alphas would take her too. Allison continues her mission to find out the meaning of the mark on her arm, but Lydia is distracted by her desire to sleep with one of the twins. She, of course, doesn't know that they're Alphas or that they're the bad guys. She just thinks they're hot. She's interested in Aiden since she has correctly deduced that Ethan is a little more into men like Danny. In a final attempt to get Isaac's memories back, they take him to the animal clinic and give him a traumatizing ice bath. Dr. Deaton says that the ice water will help him slip into a trance where he'll be able to access his blocked memories, but I already hate this guy for reasons discussed last video, and it's kind of hard to take what he says seriously. Unfortunately for me, he's right, and Isaac's ice bath helps him recover what happened when he found Erica and Boyd. He says they're locked in a bank, and that he saw Erica's body. Unfortunately, we'll have to add Erica to the list of characters whose plot lines are going to be shuffled off to someone else now. This then begs the question, if Erica is dead, then who is the girl locked in the bank with Boyd? It couldn't be the character about to get Erica's plot lines, is it? Well, it doesn't really matter who it is to our main characters, and they start to plan a rescue. Allison manages to find the symbol she was looking for, which happens to be the logo of the same bank that the werewolves plus Styles are planning to break into. Their plan isn't horrible, but Styles, Peter, and Isaac are essentially ruled out from helping. Styles isn't a werewolf, Peter isn't fully recuperated from his whole resurrection, and Isaac is still recovering from his injuries, so none of them are strong enough to assist. Looks like it'll just be Derek and Scott. Allison makes her way to the bank on her own and runs into the French teacher and guidance counselor Mrs. Morel, who tells her to hide and only come out after the fighting starts. While she does hide, she finds Erica's body, confirming without a doubt that she will not be given any storyline. Though they didn't go along, Styles and Peter remain at Derek's swanky new loft and try to figure out why the Alphas would be holed up at the bank. Presumably they have money, so why a bank? Peter realizes the bank vault is made of a special kind of stone that reflects moonlight, which means that Boyd and the mystery girl in the vault have not been shifting into werewolves during the full moon. They're going to be more bloodthirsty than ever, and Derek and Scott just walked in and got trapped in there with a line of mountain ash. Damn. Derek immediately recognizes the mystery girl as his newly revealed younger sister Cora, who he thought died in the fire that killed the rest of his family. We'll talk about Cora more later, but let's just say I don't think her character is a great addition to the show. Thankfully, since Allison followed Mrs. Morel's instructions and hid, she's able to run in and break the mountain ash barrier to rescue Scott and Derek. The downside of this is that Boyd and Cora break out and run off into the night completely feral. Allison and Derek get into an argument, and it leads to Allison finally learning that Derek only bit her mother because she was trying to get to Scott. I get that Scott didn't want to hurt her with this information, and he didn't want to tarnish the memories of her mother, but oh my god, this took way too long to get revealed. This episode is pretty good too, and the scenes with Isaac at the animal clinic and the whole part where they plan the bank rescue are great. This episode is also probably the sassiest we ever see Derek, who we all know I love, but it also progresses quite a bit of the story for all the main characters. Still not quite sure what's going on with that second villain though. Thankfully, we don't have to wait too long since episode 3 starts up immediately after episode 2 ended. Boyd and Cora are running around the woods. Scott manages to stop Boyd from killing some kids, but the two of them together are not enough to catch and contain both feral werewolves. Lydia, in the meantime, has gone for a drive to the store and ended up at a public pool instead. She finds a body of a lifeguard and screams. Somewhere else, two girls have decided that the woods are a great place to go camping. One of them, played by Zelda Williams, is trying to make the night special for her girlfriend as it'll be her first time. Instead of enjoying her first time, Caitlin's girlfriend is spooked by the bugs and runs off before getting completely covered in them and disappearing. Cora shows up, but before she has the chance to maul Robin Williams' daughter, Isaac, Scott, and Derek show up and chase her away. Stiles meets with Lydia at the pool, and he concludes that either Boyd or Cora have killed the guy. He also notices that the guy has a purity ring, which is somehow completely free of blood that is all over his hand, but whatever. Scott is upset about this, so he enlists Chris Argent's help corralling Boyd and Cora to the high school. It works pretty well, and before long they have lured both of the feral werewolves to the school. Allison is there too, but she isn't working with them. She's been keeping it a secret from her dad that she's been getting involved, but Isaac sees her anyways, outside the school. Unfortunately, the room they lock Boyd and Cora in is not completely empty, as Miss Blake is down there getting supplies. I don't know why this school keeps its supplies in the boiler room, but I stopped trying to make sense of some of these details about 2 seasons ago. Derek decides to go in alongside Boyd and Cora to protect the teacher, and he gets slashed to ribbons. No Derek dies counter, however, since the sun starts coming up and Derek has successfully protected Miss Blake. Meanwhile, at the morgue, Mrs. McCall shows Stiles that the wounds on the body from the pool are not consistent with the werewolves. Instead of being torn up by claws, they have a 3-fold death: strangulation, a cut to the throat, and a whack to the head. She also shows him another body with the same markings, which Stiles recognizes as his friend Heather, who went missing in the previous episode. This allows Stiles to make the connection that both of the victims were virgins. As he explains his conclusions to Scott, the sheriff finds the body of the girl from the beginning of the episode, dead in the same fashion. That's 3 virgins down. This episode is alright. It's probably one of the weaker ones in the season, but even that isn't really saying much since they're all pretty great. We get the beginnings of a romance subplot for Derek, which you can guarantee we'll be covering in the ship outlook at the end of 3A. We also get a little bit of the explanation about Cora, who Derek says is alive without his knowledge. He hasn't seen her since the fire and thought she was dead this whole time. If you watch this episode with subtitles, it says that Derek says he hasn't seen her in 9 years, but the showrunner Jeff Davis confirmed this is not correct, and he actually says not in years. I guess we can add that to the list of things that have muddled the Teen Wolf timeline over the years. This is also where we start really digging into the plot with our second villain, who in a very short time has already killed 3 characters. That might be a new record for this show. Episode 4 starts off with another victim of our second villain who takes dog Bullet to the vet and then is never seen again. We get a conversation between Miss Blake and Derek, and she tells him her name is Jennifer. They flirt with literature and she's super into it. Stiles is freaking out at school because of all the victims so far have been virgins, then he might be in danger. His new mission is to find out if the guy who went missing at the animal clinic was a virgin too. Isaac returns to school, and since the lacrosse season is on break, all of the members of the lacrosse team are required to take part in cross country. During cross country, the Alpha twins join too, and Isaac immediately recognizes them. They do a bit of athletic showing off, and before they can do anything to hurt Isaac, Scott shows up to help out. Just before things get serious, they hear someone screaming and run over to find the body of the guy from the animal clinic. At Derek's loft, Cora works out intensely despite her injuries not being completely healed. She argues with Derek because she only returned to town after hearing that one of the Hales was an Alpha. Apparently, she didn't know her family was alive either. She plans to go after the Alphas, but she doesn't have to try very hard because they show up at Derek's loft and beat the snot out of both of them. They even stab Derek through the lower back with a pipe. The Alphas explain to Derek what they want. Like Scott and Stiles theorized, Deucalion wants Derek to join his pack. To do so, he has to kill all his betas. But by doing that, he'll be able to absorb their power and become even stronger. It's not clear if this is actually true, since Kali, Ennis, Aiden, and Ethan all apparently did this, but none of them are really that much stronger than regular Alphas. But for Deucalion, it seems to have maybe done something. Maybe it's placebo, maybe it's not. They leave, and they do the courtesy of removing the pipe from Derek's back too. No Derek dies counter here either. Yay. At school, Isaac has become determined to get revenge on the Alpha twins, so he goes to fight them in the hallway. Aiden starts beating up Ethan instead, and Isaac gets blamed for the whole thing when people see what happened. Stiles also learns that the guy from the beginning of the episode who they found dead at cross country was not a virgin, so his whole theory is completely shot. At least he's maybe safe though. He also learns that the FBI has come to town to investigate, since apparently this serial killer is more serial killer-y than the ones from the other 2 seasons, and they've finally taken notice. Later, he finds out the victim was in ROTC, which is like a youth military training program, but he isn't able to fully make a conclusion about what that means for the whole serial killings thing. Allison talks to Isaac and asks him not to reveal that she helped corral Boyd and Cora, and Isaac agrees. As part of Scott and Isaac's plan to make the Alpha twins angry, they ride one of the bikes into the school and blame it on them. Aiden gets suspended because of this, which is a bonus. Stiles goes to Dr. Deaton's about the murders and learns that they may be the work of a dark druid, or Darak. Styles is able to put the pieces together and conclude that the Duroc is killing people in sacrifices of 3: virgins, healers, philosophers, guardians, and warriors. The 3 virgins are done already, so perhaps the ROTC connection means they're going for warriors next. Lydia connects this to Mr. Harris, who has military connections, and sure enough, he is later killed. He begs for his life and reveals that he has been working alongside this killer, but they don't listen and take him off the playing field. Derek, having been given his ultimatum from the Alpha Pack, decides that it might be better if he doesn't have a pack to kill, so he forces Isaac to move out of the loft. It's not entirely clear why he doesn't do the same with Boyd, Peter, or his literal sister, but it seems he actually cares about Isaac, though he does a really bad job showing it. Isaac shows up at Scott's house and asks if he can stay. Cue these Skyzik shippers squealing. This is another okay episode. We get a lot of explanation regarding both sides of our villains, but ultimately it's a little less interesting than some episodes that come later, and it's not quite as good as that first one. Episode 5 is set up completely out of timeline order, with tons of flashbacks and flash forwards and hallucinations, so I'll just explain this one in the order that it actually happens rather than how it's presented to us. Hold on to your hats because there's a lot. Scott finds out about Allison's involvement at the school on the night they rescued Boyd and Cora from the bank. He warns her about the Alpha Pack, and they flirt a little, though it ultimately goes nowhere. It's revealed that Allison's family moved out of their mansion and into a large apartment. It's also revealed that the Alpha Pack has been living in the penthouse of that same building, just a floor or 2 above the Argent. Scott runs into Deucalion there, and Deucalion teases him about becoming an Alpha himself, so they can recruit him instead of Derek. Scott, as you might imagine, is not interested. Derek tells Scott about his plan to attack the Alphas, and Vaughn tells Scott to come along. Scott does not want to kill any of them, but Boyd and Cora say they're only going to kill Deucalion because they think they can take out the leader and the whole group will fall apart. Allison tries to convince her dad to help Scott and the other werewolves, but Chris doesn't want to get involved. He warns Allison that she has to be careful and find a safe place in between the 2 opposing sides. Allison doesn't like this idea and pretty firmly decides to side with her friend. Character growth. Compared to the Allison from the end of last season, it's practically a 180. Scott decides to go behind Derek's back and confront Deucalion himself, peacefully. Isaac, now no longer part of Derek's pack but siding with Scott, goes with him. They meet up in an abandoned mall, but Derek and co show up as well. Apparently, Scott wasn't paying close enough attention to the plan because the fight is about to start. Kali, Ennis, and the twins show up, and it is a full-on werewolf brawl. The Alphas take control of the fight pretty quickly, which is understandable, considering they've been wolves for a lot longer and they are significantly stronger. Deucalion encourages Derek to kill Boyd and take his first step to becoming one of them, but Allison shows up to help before he has to make any fatal decisions. With the added help, Derek and Scott are able to get all the injured allies out of the way, and Scott managed to push Ennis back with a twinge of alpha red in his eyes. Huh? Derek steps in to help and ends up taking Ennis with him off the side of the escalators, both of them falling to their presumed death. A day or so later, the cross-country team is on a bus on their way to a meet. Scott is still very injured since alpha wounds take longer to heal, and things are not helped because Ethan and Boyd are on the bus and a fight is about to break out. Ethan is waiting for the news about Ennis, who is in critical condition after the fall, and Scott is upset because Derek has died again. Allison and Lydia follow behind the bus in Allison's car, trying to remain unseen. After what happened at the abandoned mall, Allison is not willing to let Scott wander off alone. Back at that mall, Cora and Peter investigate the area where Derek and Ennis fell. It seems both Ennis and Derek's bodies have disappeared. They hope this means that Derek is alive, which it wouldn't be the first time. Aiden and Kali go to the animal clinic at the behest of Mrs. Morel, who urges Dr. Deaton to help Ennis. He doesn't want to, since they're, evil, but he doesn't because Morel warns him that they'll kill Scott if Ennis dies untreated. Scott's injuries are not healing and he seems to be getting worse, so Styles tries to convince the coach to stop the bus. Coach refuses because of course he does, so Styles uses one of the students who has a car sickness to his advantage. This is Jared, and he's our second fan appearance for the series. Like Chantal Rose, who plays Danielle, Jeremiah Sutheim won a contest to appear on the show. And like Danielle, Jared is a fun addition. At the rest stop, they rush Scott into the bathroom and check his wound, and Allison helps by stitching him together so his mind will think he's healing. This is a great scene and it helps to demonstrate Allison's struggle. I wish we got more moments like this back in season 2 when she was so gung-ho on attacking people, but they really stand out here. At the animal clinic, Peter and Cora arrive to ask some questions, but they notice the presence of the Alphas and don't go inside. Deaton finishes treating Ennis, and he tells Deucalion that he'll survive, but Deucalion decides that's not going to work for him, so he kills Ennis himself. Since he's the leader of the Alpha Pack, presumably he's able to absorb Ennis's power by doing this too. When they tell Kali They leave out the information that he died by Deucalion's hand, so she mourns and vows to take it out on Derek and his pack. Peter and Cora hear her wailing and they realize that Ennis is donezo. Finally, at the school, we see Jennifer getting in her car and Derek stumbles out covered in blood. He lives. This episode is alright. If I had to pick one, I'd probably say it's the weakest in the season. I think this is mostly because of the disjointed way the episode is told out of order, but it's stylistically relevant because Scott is studying for the SATs and the word of the day is incongruous. I don't think it comes across in the artistic way they intended, though it does help to add some of the tension regarding whether or not Derek is really dead, especially since they drop Scott's line about Derek being dead really early on, and we don't get confirmation that he's alive until the very end. It also has one of the more important Alpha Pack moments since we're officially down from 5 to 4, and unlike Derek, Ennis will not be coming back from this. Episode 6 is one of the most highly regarded episodes, and it's not hard to see why. The cross-country team's meet has been postponed due to all that traffic from the last episode, so they need to stay at a motel overnight. By complete luck, they end up at a hotel that is well known for guest suicide. And the rest of the episode we get quite a bit of discussion of self-harm, so please approach this with caution if that will affect you. Back at Derek's loft, Jennifer helps Derek, who is healing very slowly from his wounds. They flirt, and when he tries to leave to tell the others he's alive, she mentions that perhaps he can use a false death to his advantage. Lots of characters in literature have done the same. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Ultimately, this leads to the two of them sleeping together. Things start getting very weird at the hotel, and all of the werewolves start to experience hallucinations that encourage them to end their lives. We'll cover each of them all in one go here. Isaac is in a trance and flicking channels on the TV, and he starts to hear the voice of his father and hallucinating events of his abuse, so he hides under the bed. Boyd has visions of his younger sister, who disappeared and died when he was younger. He blames himself, so he goes into the bathtub and uses the room's safe to hold himself under the water. Ethan spends time with Danny, but he has hallucinations about another person being stuck inside his chest. He grabs a construction saw and goes to open himself up. Scott has a hallucination of Deucalion holding his mother hostage, which ends with him killing her in front of him. Styles shows up, and Scott's hallucination ends for a moment. All the while, Lydia is having auditory hallucinations as well. She hears accounts of what sounds like people ending their own lives, but every time she and Allison go to check, there's nothing there. They meet up with Styles and figure out that the motel is well known for suicide, and then they hear the sound of the power saw that Ethan picked up. They rush in, stopping him from cutting himself open, and use a space heater to burn him a little to snap him out of his hallucination. They realize that all the werewolves must be having these, so they rush off to Scott's room, but he isn't there. They go to Boyd and Isaac's room next, and are barely able to get Boyd out of the bathtub before he drowns. Because he's underwater, they can't use any electric heaters like they did with Ethan, so they use a road flare since they're waterproof. Lydia also finds Isaac underneath the bed, and they use the flare to snap him out of it too. With just Scott left, they find him in the parking lot. He's covered himself in gasoline and is holding a road flare of his own, and in his hallucinations, he blames himself for Derek's not really death. There's an excellent moment between Styles and Scott where they reaffirm their friendship, and Scott does not go up in flames. They do, however, cause an explosion, and from inside the blast, Lydia sees the image of the Duroc with a twisted face and a bald head. The next morning, they all load back onto the bus and learn the cross-country meet, which has been the motivation for the last 2 episodes, is actually just cancelled, so they're going back to school. Elsewhere, Chris Argent pulls up to a mysterious room and starts questioning Gerard, who is revealed to still be alive and still leaking that disgusting black goo from the previous season. This is a highlight of 3A for sure. Because so much of this show builds off the friendship between Scott and Styles, this episode sort of acts as a culmination of all that, and it all comes together in that great moment with the road flare. Even people who don't really like Scott tend to point at that scene as impactful. Plus, we get a good look at the Duroc and get to see a bit of what's going on with Lydia. All in all, a very solid episode. In episode 7, the hospital is completely overwhelmed due to a multi-car pileup on the highway. It seems that one of the ER doctors is missing and isn't answering any of their calls. Ethan shows up at the hospital with Danny, who is clearly not doing well. He vomits up a bunch of mistletoe, which Scott recognizes from one of his lessons with Deaton. It's poisonous to both werewolves and humans, so it does not bode well that it's entered the picture. Mrs. McCall steps in and saves his life, to everyone's relief. We love Danny, and we do not want him to die now. Ethan admits to Scott that he had nothing to do with Danny's hospital visit, and that the Alpha Pack's plan was to get close to both Danny and Lydia because they know one of them would be important. They know now that it's Lydia, so Danny is in no danger, at least from them. Another doctor on the way to the hospital is swarmed by moths in her car and ultimately abducted by the Duroc. That's 2 doctors down. But what was that one group of sacrifices again? Healers? The mistletoe thing doesn't match the threefold death, but that Duroc has been using, so what gives? At Derek's loft, the alarm goes off, and he and Cora prepare to fight the Alphas one last time. Scott and Isaac stand watch over Melissa since there's still one healer sacrifice unaccounted for, and while she's not a doctor, she definitely healed Danny. Scott gets a call from Dr. Deaton, and it turns out that Deaton is the last healer sacrifice. He managed to make a phone call just before he's taken, so Scott jumps into action to find him. Scott goes to the animal clinic where the sheriff is already waiting. Stiles and Scott have a talk about telling the sheriff the truth since there's no way he'll be able to piece all those crimes together without knowing. But Stiles doesn't want his dad to get involved and get hurt. Still, they decide that Scott is right and they should tell him. They don't get the chance yet, however, since Mrs. Morell shows up and gives them the hint that Lydia might be the only one who can find Deaton. That's not ominous at all. Lydia, meanwhile, is making out with Aiden in Coach's office. The fire alarm goes off, which was pulled by Cora. She does not like Lydia and thinks her choice in men is questionable at best. She threatens Lydia, but Stiles shows up and makes her back off. They try a few different ways to get Lydia to find Dr. Deaton, but nothing works. They do realize, however, that Danny wasn't a sacrifice but was a target of the Duroc, so they go to the hospital to find out why. At Derek's loft, Boyd and Isaac show up to help Derek against the Alphas. Boyd has taken some ideas from his time in the Argent's basement and figured out that they could flood the loft and use the electricity to incapacitate the Alphas all in one go. Allison investigates her dad's study and finds a bunch of markings on a map of the town. They call Stiles, who is going through Danny's things while he sleeps, and they learn about telluric currents, which are natural low-frequency currents that flow through the earth. The place where the currents overlap are marked on Argent's map, and they realize that this is where the sacrifices are being killed. Back at Derek's loft, the plan immediately goes to shit because the Alphas cut the power, so they roll up and start fighting. Kali blames Derek for Ennis' death, and she has kidnapped Jennifer in order to make the fight just a one-on-one between her and Derek. At the animal clinic, the rest of the gang meets up to look at Danny's research, and realize that the currents overlap at the bank from earlier in the season. So that must be where Deaton is. Scott goes to help Deaton, and since Cora gets a text from Boyd that the plan didn't work, the rest of them go to the loft to help Derek. Scott arrives at the bank and finds Deaton, though he's surrounded by a circle of mountain ash, so Scott can't get through to help him. He tries, and his eyes sort of turn red for a second, but it doesn't work. It seems hopeless until Sheriff Stilinski shows up and shoots the rope holding Deaton up. He explains to Scott and Deaton that he found them because the bank logo looked kind of like one of the Celtic symbols. Deaton also tells Scott that he just saw his eyes turning red and it might be something special called a true alpha. Essentially, a true alpha is a werewolf who earns their alpha status by character and not by taking it from another. Scott realizes this means he's the Alpha Pack's actual target and not Derek. Derek, meanwhile, is busy losing his fight with Kali. Stiles, Lydia, and Cora arrive and turn the power back on, which leads to most of the werewolves in the room getting electrocuted, including Derek, Kali, and Boyd. Kali recovers first, and she gets the twins to hold Derek down while she picks up Boyd and impales him on Derek's claws. Once again, something has been done to Derek against his will, and this time it ends with Boyd's death. They leave, giving Derek a final ultimatum of joining the Alpha Pack or she will kill the rest of the pack herself. Cora cries over Boyd, which is understandable because they were locked up together and were presumably close, and Stiles comforts Derek. This is one of the more memorable episodes of the season, and it marks the official end for both Boyd and Erica, who we saw in a brief flashback. If we're keeping track of the members of Derek's pack, he bit Jackson, who left for England, then Isaac, who's okay but no longer really with him. He bit both Erica and Boyd, who are now both dead, and then he bit Allison's mom, who is also dead. He got Peter and Cora, and sometimes Scott, depending on the mood, but they don't really count since they're mostly free agents. Really bad stats for Derek, unfortunately. I'll take this moment to talk about the whole True Alpha thing too. I mentioned way back in the first season video that this show sort of hates Derek. At the time, I really meant that they never seem to know what they want to do with his character, and kind of make him flip-flop between good guy and bad guy as they feel, but it goes a little bit further than that. After the response to Season 2 and the massive increase in the Derek fandom, the showrunners and writers seemed to get a little frustrated by the amount of attention that the fandom was giving characters like Stiles and Derek, rather than Scott, who is by all accounts the main character. Plus, in the second season, Derek is an alpha and Scott is just a beta, so people really tended to focus more on Derek when they wanted a werewolf, and Scott was mostly vilified or completely ignored. I get this a little, since if I was the creator of a popular series and people were just completely ignoring the main character in favor of a ship that isn't even canon, I would be rightfully upset about that too. But as I mentioned in my Sterek video, there was quite a bit of backlash from the fandom about how Sterek was handled in the second season, both in the show and behind the scenes, and it led to a lot of negative fan response directed at the writers and showrunner. Seemingly in response, they decided to take Derek down a peg and elevate Scott up with the true alpha thing, which is a status Derek can never have since he already got his alpha power from taking it from Peter. I think the theory was to make Scott even more special by making him this super rare thing, and it was sort of a bonus that Derek could never really compare to that. They go even further with taking Derek down a peg later, which we'll get to, but it's hard to look at these things and not see them as kind of hurtful to fans of Derek who have to watch him get beaten down again and again and again. You could probably conclude that the true alpha thing is more an inclusion to give Scott official alpha status without having him compromise his morals and kill someone, but there isn't really any reason that it can't be both character driven and a jab at the fans who have been treating the writers like shit. I'm curious to hear your take on this since I don't think it's a clear-cut issue. If you leave a comment, I'll be sure to read them all. In the next episode, we open to an extended flashback of Derek when he was younger. They cast the absolute perfect actor for this role since he does a perfect job of emulating Derek's behavior and he does look a decent bit like younger Tyler Hoechlin. The timeline of this episode is iffy in the grand scheme since we know it's before the Hailfire, which was 6 or 7 years now before the show, which as we discussed in the first episode would have made Derek about 13 then, but he's clearly stated to be about 15 here, and it's more than that 6 or 7 years prior, so we'll have to chalk this up to that retcon Derek age we mentioned earlier. If he's 15 here, Derek is about 22 or 23 now, which lines up with the estimate post-age change. They actually joke about the age thing in this episode too, probably to stop this exact level of nitpicking. Anywho, young Derek runs through the woods as he's followed by hunters, and young Peter steps in to rescue him from a flying arrow. He takes Derek to some kind of root cellar and they hide. You can see a big tree glowing through the foundation, and this fuck-ass tree will be incredibly important for the rest of the series. We jump back to the present timeline and we see Cora and Peter telling all this information to Styles. We learn that Derek has been in hiding since Boyd's death, presumably so he doesn't have to kill anyone else, but that's neither here nor there. Peter tells Styles that Derek used to be a lot like Scott and that there's a story about the time Derek's eyes changed from yellow to blue. We get a different side of the story from Gerard as well, who tells the whole thing to Scott. In the past, Derek finds himself smitten with a cello-playing girl named Paige. He flirts with her quite a bit and takes her to his favorite place, which is an abandoned distillery. I guess we know why Derek was so fond of his train car and his industrial loft. The guy just really likes abandoned sheet metal, I guess. At the distillery, we also see Deucalion, Kali, and Ennis, but this is before they've killed their entire packs. There's some tension happening between the wolves and the hunters, and Deucalion wants to remain peaceful. We also meet Talia Hale, Derek's mom, who has the ability to fully shift into a wolf. This form is called an evolved werewolf, but we won't get that info until next season. Deucalion asks for peace, but Ennis is mad that the hunters killed one of his pack and vows revenge. Apparently unable to identify anger, Derek uses this opportunity to have a long and happy life with Paige. We find out later that he approaches Ennis and asks him to bite Paige. This would mean he doesn't have to keep his werewolf secret from her, and Ennis would have a new pack member to replace the one the hunters killed. Win-win, right? Well, it turns out that Peter is directly responsible for Derek thinking he can't be with Paige if she knew about his secret. This is a sort of running theme throughout the episode. Both Gerard and Peter are telling their stories, but what we actually see on the screen doesn't always reflect exactly what they're saying. Peter says Derek was worried, but then it shows us Peter manipulating him into thinking that way. The unreliable narrator if we're jumping back to 10th grade English class analysis. We learn a little bit about the druids, which act as a kind of emissary to keep the werewolves connected to humanity. That big tree in the root cellar is actually what they call a nematon, which is a sacred space for druids. Apparently cutting down one or harming it in any way can lead to disastrous events for the surrounding area. Sure would be a shame if they did that. Oh wait. Anyways, we learn the druid emissary is often a secret to the whole pack, and only the alpha would really know their identity. From this, we learn that Deaton used to be the emissary for the Hale Pack, and Mrs. Morell is currently the emissary for the Alpha Pack. At the high school, still in the past, Paige is attacked by Ennis. Derek has a moment of regret about setting the whole thing up, but when he goes to stop Ennis, he sees that she's already been bitten. Elsewhere, the younger Deucalion meets with Gerard and the other hunters to negotiate a truce, but the hunters turn on Deucalion and Gerard uses the flashbang arrows to stab him in the eyes. It turns out that Gerard is the reason that Deucalion is blind at all. Derek takes Paige back to that root cellar and it appears the bite is not working on her and she's rejecting it. She tells him that she knew all about him being a werewolf all along and she didn't mind. Just to twist the knife in Derek's heart that all of this was unnecessary. He tries to take her pain, but it stops working because she's going to die. She asks him for mercy and he holds her and kills her before the bite rejection can do it. Because he took the life of an innocent, his eyes change from yellow to blue. Young Derek tells his mom about what happened, and she reassures him that his eyes are still beautiful. And yes, they really are. The blue eyes are the nicest looking ones in the series. I will defend blue-eyed Derek for the rest of my life. In the present, Stiles tells Cora that he doesn't believe Peter was telling the whole truth. She asks if he would ask Derek about the story, and he says he will if he has to. Similarly, Scott tells Gerard that he doesn't buy his side of the story, and that if Gerard was really lying, then he will come back and finish off what the season 2 finale couldn't. This is probably my favorite episode of 3A, but we all know I'm completely biased because Derek is my favorite. Even considering the audience has to sort out the truth from the lies a little, I think adding the element to Derek's backstory is great. I was never really a fan of Derek's seduction abuse in the first season anyways, so it's nice to get part of his backstory that doesn't completely suck. And we can add this to the list of reasons that he just deserves something nice in his life. Like seriously, give the guy a break. The one thing I don't particularly like is the explanation for the color of a wolf's eyes. I touched on it in the season 2 video, but it's widely believed that the original meaning of blue eyes for a beta is that they were born with some kind of werewolf lineage. Up until this season, that made perfect sense. There are some accounts of people saying that this change was stated by production, but I was unable to find any actual evidence of this when researching for this series, so really it's all hearsay. However, it has also been alleged that the reason that they went ahead and changed the explanation is because of Jackson's departure from the series. They say that if he had explained that blue means werewolf lineage, then the audience would be confused and wonder why Jackson had blue eyes at the end of season 2, and they would have been unable to explain this properly since Jackson wasn't around anymore. They can't really have a whole plot about Jackson's secret birth family being werewolves, or maybe even Peter, if Jackson isn't even on the show anymore. So, allegedly, they changed the explanation and landed on this instead. It's kind of convenient that it works, since up to this point we only really have Derek, Peter, and Jackson as characters with blue eyes, and all three of them have killed innocents in some sense. Maybe I'm just bitter that Derek doesn't have his blue eyes anymore, but I'm only really 50-50 on this explanation. I think the werewolf lineage thing works and could have led to some interesting plot lines with werewolves who discriminate based on birth status, but instead we get an explanation that sort of undermines some of the hunter's actions in the previous season. If a werewolf who has killed an innocent automatically has blue eyes, other than alphas of course, why don't the hunters just go kill the ones with blue eyes? Most of the time in the first season, they're pretty lenient with Derek wandering around even though they know his eyes are blue, and Chris Argent even lets Derek go a few times despite knowing this. Similarly, the homeless Omega in the first episode of season 2 is shown to have yellow eyes, so when he claims he hasn't killed anyone, he's clearly telling the truth and they kill him anyway. Granted, this is maybe a poor example since it was Gerard and he completely given up on the code, but I digress. If there's a big blue sign that a werewolf is deemed okay for hunters to kill, then why do the hunters even bother doing half of what they're doing? It really does not help to paint the hunters as anything other than sort of speciesist and bloodthirsty. And a big part of the Argent storyline is that there are actually hunters who follow a code and do it for the good of protecting people. It just would have made more sense if they cut their losses with the Jackson storyline and kept the alleged original reasoning. It might even have made the whole true alpha thing more impressive, since Scott would be ascending to alpha status from yellow eyes, and that could have led to a whole plot about elitism in the werewolf communities. Anyway, moving on. The next episode starts with another sacrifice. This time a deputy who we've seen a few times named Tara. I wonder what category she falls under. Scott and Stiles show up at the school because Lydia has had another one of her fugue state treks and ends up finding the deputy's body. The next day, it's revealed that they're holding a recital at the school to honor all the deaths that have been happening in the last year or so. Mr. Argent asks Allison if she's going to go, and she says she probably won't. As soon as he leaves, she jumps up and goes off to do some hunting, but she has a run-in with Isaac first, who says that he came to check up on her. Is that the beginning of a romance, I detect? We have a moment with the Alpha twins where we get to see a more human side of them. It's clear that Ethan is interested in and concerned about Danny, and Aiden warns him that they aren't really high school students and not to get any more attached. Similarly, Lydia gets upset with Aiden for the twins' involvement in killing Boyd. As much as Aiden rags on Ethan for getting attached to Danny, he's just as attached to Lydia. While Lydia distracts Aiden, Scott and Stiles talk to Ethan and learn about their backstory. They used to be treated very poorly by their alpha, so Deucalion taught them how to merge, and they used the ability to take the alpha power. Cora arrives at the school and attacks Aiden, but before he really fights back, they're stopped by Scott, Stiles, and Ethan. Still, Cora is very badly injured here, which will cause problems for the rest of the season. It's kind of glossed over when it happens, but this single hit from Aiden pretty much nearly kills her. Cora gets mad at the gang and Styles decides to give her a ride back to the loft. Miss Blake reunites with Derek after his leave of absence and they flirt a bunch. It's very cute, although ultimately my opinions of this relationship are still conflicted. More on that in the ship outlook section. While Styles drives Cora home, he gets a call from Allison, who's used the markings on her dad's desk to determine that the guardians that still need to be sacrificed may mean law enforcement, which means his dad is in danger. They decide to go to his house and use Cora to reveal the truth about the whole werewolf thing to the sheriff. Another teacher is kidnapped from the school, and Lydia is right around the corner to have another episode and scream. Jennifer tries to calm her down, but she is justifiably freaked out that another teacher may have been kidnapped and sacrificed. The pattern doesn't seem to match up though, since the first victim is a deputy and the second is a teacher. In his room, Styles starts to tell his dad about everything that's been going on. He uses a chessboard and labels the pieces, telling his dad everything. His dad does not believe him though, so he tries to get Cora to shift and prove it, but she passes out due to her injury from earlier. Allison and Isaac use her dad's notes to figure out where the next victim is likely to be sacrificed, and they show up at the location just in time to watch the Duroc kill the teacher. Mr. Argent shows up and fires his gun at the Duroc, but the druid manages to get away. Allison realizes that they were wrong about the next set of victims being guardians, as in law enforcement, but rather that it's philosophers, as in teachers. This makes sense because the deputy that died in the beginning of the episode is revealed to have previously been a middle school teacher. We see an ominous shot of Miss Blake ushering people into the recital. Could she be the next victim? That would not be fun for Derek. Styles and the sheriff take Cora to the hospital, and it's clear that the sheriff simply does not believe Styles. In one of the most heartbreaking lines of the season, Styles says that
Mom would have believed me.
and breaks literally everyone's heart in the process. Like, damn. At the recital, Ethan tells Danny to find him if anything happens. Most of our main characters are here at the recital, which is usually a sign that something horrible is about to happen. As the song goes on, it builds and builds with tension until a piano wire snaps and kills one of the teachers playing the piano. That's all our philosophers killed. Lydia gets a text that seems to be from Aiden, so she leaves the recital before the death happens and enters one of the empty classrooms. Miss Blake shows up and knocks her out. Oh no. When she wakes up, Lydia has been tied to a chair by Jennifer, who reveals herself to be the Duroc. She doesn't plan to sacrifice Lydia, but she just knows too much. Similar to Danny, who was targeted because of the information he had on the telluric current. Before she can kill Lydia, she screams, which Jennifer is surprised by. She tells Lydia that she's a banshee, which explains a lot of things about what she's been up to for the last season and a half. As an omen of death, she's drawn to seek out the bodies, and it may also be part of how she was able to resurrect Peter back in season 2, and why she didn't turn into a werewolf when he bit her in season 1. Jennifer goes to kill Lydia again, but the sheriff shows up and stops it. She manages to throw a knife into the sheriff's arm, and we get a rundown on what exactly the sacrifices are even doing for her. It's implied heavily that the sacrifices give her traits that she can use to make herself stronger. The philosophers give her knowledge and strategy, the healers give her the ability to heal her wounds, the warriors make her stronger, and the Guardians presumably make her able to defend herself more easily. This isn't really confirmed here because she hasn't sacrificed them yet, but it's implied. It's also not really confirmed what sacrificing the virgins does, but she kisses the sheriff and for a second he seems kind of into it. Maybe it's implying that sacrificing the virgins is what allowed her to look beautiful rather than the clawed up Duroc form, but she already kind of looked like this before she killed all the virgins, so who knows. Scott and Styles manage to break into the classroom, but it's too late as Jennifer has taken the sheriff. That's one Guardian. This is a fantastic episode, and since the Duroc is one of my favorite villains, it's awesome to get the reveal and to get more details about her whole plan. We don't quite know exactly what she plans to do with this power, but we know she is becoming immensely powerful. I don't really like how this means that Derek has had dalliances with not one but 2 serial killers now, and since I low-key liked the 2 of them together, it's a bit of a gut punch to see that Jennifer is the villain. It kind of adds to the whole aspect that whenever there's a new person in this show, they just immediately become a suspect. We also finally get the Lydia reveal, which is a build-up of almost 2 entire seasons. I like the addition of this in this season, since so far we've been progressively adding new creatures, and since 3A really didn't add anything new, it's nice to stick this in here. Yeah, I know the Duroc is technically new, but it's an extension of the druid thing which was explained at first in the second season. I look forward to the rest of the show when we finally get some more details on what exactly banshees can do other than wander into undiscovered murder scenes and scream. In episode 10, there's a huge storm over the town that is affecting the hospital. Presumably this has something to do with the Durock's power, and it is causing problems for literally everyone. Peter sits with Cora and is frustrated because she's not been evacuated yet. Melissa McCall tries to explain that the evacuation is still ongoing, and then she sees Peter's face and recognizes him. They did have that one date before, and she knows he was supposed to be killed. But before they really talk about it, the monitors start beeping and Cora vomits up some mistletoe. It seems her injury may have been increased by some meddling from the Durock. Speaking of the Durock, Jennifer shows up at Derek's loft, pretending to be freaked out about everything that has been happening. She's a little late though, as Scott and Stiles have already been there and told her that she kidnapped Stiles' dad. Because he's the best, Derek immediately sides with Stiles and Scott and threatens her. She manipulates the situation by saying that she's the only one who can save Cora and save the sheriff. In the car on the way to the hospital, she tries to explain to Derek that they're connected in more ways than he realizes, but he does not want to hear it. He's probably realizing that this is his second serial killing girlfriend and he should probably step back from the whole dating scene for a while. When they get to the hospital, they find out that there are 2 more ambulances coming. One in 10 minutes and one in 20 minutes. If Cora's not on one of them, then she won't be evacuated. Derek goes to find her, but instead finds Peter, who has been thrown around by the Alpha twins. They're sort of holding Cora hostage until Derek gives up Jennifer, who manages to slip away for a second when they're distracted. Derek, Scott, Stiles, and Peter manage to get Cora and are chased by the twins, who have merged together again and are barely able to get away from them long enough to get Cora to a safe room. Jennifer arrives again and says that she will only heal Cora if Derek and the gang get her to safety, and since all of the Alphas are descending on the hospital, this is not going to be easy. Scott's mom comes on the speaker of the hospital and tells them that Deucalion has issued an ultimatum. Jennifer or his mom. They're not interested in this plan, so they come up with a new one. Peter and Scott will distract the twins while Derek goes with Jennifer, Stiles, and Cora to safety. They find one of the ambulances and load Cora up, only to see the driver is dead. So Stiles takes refuge in the back of the ambulance with Cora while Derek and Jennifer go look for something else. In the elevator, Jennifer tells Derek about their connection. She used to be Kali's emissary, and when they turned around and decided to kill their whole pack, she got torn up. When Derek mercy killed Paige in the root cellar beneath the Nematon, it was able to give the tree enough power to keep Jennifer from dying. She vowed then to get revenge on the Alphas who overlook and take advantage of their emissaries. She also reveals that during the total lunar eclipse, which is coming up soon, the werewolves will lose all their power momentarily. That will be her chance to take them all out. Then, using her new Doraki strength, she knocks Derek out. Scott and Peter successfully evade the twins, and Deucalion lets his mom go without hurting her. They aren't really sure why he does this, but before they really make any conclusions, they run into Isaac, Allison, and Mr. Argent. They all want to escape the hospital, but they just need to get Jennifer since she's the one keeping Stiles' dad alive, so they plan to have Allison disguise herself as Jennifer in order to distract the Alphas long enough to get her out safely. It works, and then the Argents are able to make the Alphas go away with a bunch of bullets. Meanwhile, Mrs. McCall turns the hospital power back on. Isaac shows up at the garage where the ambulance is, and he, Stiles, and Peter load Cora up into a car so they can drive her to the other hospital themselves. Stiles notices a piece of paper in the back of the ambulance that says parent or guardian, and realizes that the guardians Jennifer is planning to sacrifice are actually just the main character's parents. Charity has one, and before the rest of the gang can catch on, she kidnaps Scott's mom too. Scott makes a deal with Deucalion to get their parents back, and we see that both the sheriff and Mrs. McCall are alive and tied up in the old root cellar below the Nematon. This episode has so much going on that it's probably one of the most important for the season. Practically all of our characters are here, and they're all teaming up and fighting in different groups all episode. Hopefully this little recap did it justice. We finally get our full explanation for both what the Durock wants and what the Alpha Pack wants, and that's almost the closest our villain motivations have ever been connected so far. It's not quite Peter and Kate levels, but it's certainly closer than Gerard and Matt. As we near the end of 3A, episode 11 starts right back up where the previous one ended, and Stiles punches Derek awake in the elevator. Since the two parents are missing now, they really need Derek's help, but Derek is more concerned for Cora. In the hospital, Stiles runs into an FBI agent that he recognizes, and Stiles is not happy to see him. The agent asks what happens to the sheriff, and Stiles is deliberately difficult with him. We also get our final confirmation that Jennifer is coming for Argent next, since his name is painted on the elevator doors. At Derek's loft, Cora is dying, and Derek is distraught. Isaac very unfairly yells at him for sleeping with Jennifer, as if Derek knew she was a serial killer. We'll get into that when we talk about characters, but there's also a chance she was using her druid magic to seduce and manipulate Derek. So if that's the case, then this is an even more unfair argument. Isaac gets frustrated at Derek's inaction, so he leaves to join up with Scott. After Isaac leaves, Derek takes Cora's pain. He takes so much pain he goes so far and gives up his alpha power in order to keep her alive. This falls right into Peter's plan since we know he wants to be the alpha, and if Derek isn't one, then he's a step closer. Allison and Mr. Argent try to catch Jennifer before she can sacrifice the parents, and Allison suggests including Lydia since she has a tendency to show up where people die. Maybe they'll show up before someone dies this time. They ultimately don't use her help, but they do work alongside Isaac to go back to the bank in an attempt to catch Jennifer. Turns out, Mr. Argent tricked them and he incapacitates both Isaac and Allison before the Duroc shows up and takes him too. This is awful news for our main characters because she has all 3 parents now. When Stiles gets the news, he starts having a panic attack at the school. Lydia is able to stop it by kissing him, which she says helps because it makes him hold his breath. They go to Mrs. Morel, who definitely knows more than she lets on, and they realize that the tree Lydia has been drawing all season when she has her fugue states is actually the roots of a tree and not the branches. Stiles connects that back to the backstory he heard about Derek and figures out that the parents must be held in that root cellar. Stiles sends Lydia to Derek and Peter since they know where it is, and is briefly stopped by the FBI agent from earlier. In said root cellar, Argent wakes up and has a conversation with Sheriff and Melissa. They chat, which is fun because they don't usually get scenes together, and it looks like the sheriff finally believes all this werewolf stuff. Lydia arrives at Derek's place and sees Peter for the first time since she resurrected him. It's awkward to say the least. Derek and Peter tell her they don't know where the Nemeton is since Talia used her claws to take their memories about it after the whole page thing happened. Mrs. Morel, who was never at the high school, has been running away from the Alpha Pack in the woods. We learn that she's the one who sent Brayden to rescue Isaac in the first episode, and that she's both been working with the Alpha Pack and working against them. She tells them that if they find the Nemeton, they will find Jennifer. At the animal clinic, our main group speak with Deaton about a way to find the Nemeton. They decide that they'll do their own sacrifice. Scott, Allison, and Stiles will die for a few seconds, and then their friends will bring them back. Their surrogate sacrifice will charge the Nemeton and help them find it, and maybe serve as a replacement for their parents' sacrifice too. Before they go ahead with it, Stiles drops some more info. That FBI agent that's been hounding Stiles all episode is Scott's dad. They pair up, Scott with Deaton, Allison with Isaac, and Stiles with Lydia, and they go under. We're so close to the end of 3A now, and this scene at the end of the episode marks probably the most important moment in the entire series. By doing this, they will unknowingly set the events of 3B in motion, as well as revitalize the Nemeton, which will indirectly cause the events of every single season and the movie. Deaton said it would be dangerous, but I think he underestimated the danger here. I'd like to blame the events of the rest of the series on him, but I just kinda hate him, so. In the 3A finale, we pick up right where we left off with Scott, Allison, and Stiles in their metal ice bath. They wake up in a giant white room, which is the blank expression of their inner minds. They see the giant tree stump of the Nemeton and each have a flashback memory of a time they were close to the Nemeton. Scott remembers back to the pilot episode when he was in the woods and found Laura Hale's body. Stiles also finds himself that same night, and Allison does as well. Though with Allison, we get the information that the car that almost hit Scott in the first episode was actually being driven by Mrs. Argent. As their memories end, they all bump into the Nemeton. They wake up from their sacrifice and learn that they've been in the water for 16 hours, which means they've only have 4 hours before the eclipse, and therefore 4 hours before their parents are definitely murdered. At Derek's loft, Cora is completely okay again. It seems Derek giving up his alpha spark is exactly what the doctor ordered. Unfortunately, he's in no shape now to fight any of the alphas, especially not Kali, who's on her way to kill him right now. The alarm goes off, but Derek has successfully escaped with Cora by the time she arrives. The only ones left in the loft are Lydia and Ethan, who try to distract Kali and Aiden. Jennifer shows up, and in a very anticlimactic fight, she easily dispatches the twins in their merged form by snapping their neck, and then uses her druid magic to kill Kali. She gets Lydia to scream like a banshee, which Derek hears, and decides he needs to go back to the loft. Lucky for him, all his enemies are dead now, so maybe he'll be fine. Stiles is on the way to the Nemeton and crashes his jeep due to the severe storm. It will be fine, and Stiles will be fine too. Meanwhile, Allison and Scott deal with Scott's dad, who interrogates them about Mr. Argent's whereabouts. Allison throws a smoke grenade at the federal agents and they escape. It's kind of wild there are never any consequences for this, seeing as she just technically assaulted a bunch of officers, but anyways. Jennifer enlists Derek's help to stop Deucalion since he's the only alpha left, and Derek agrees as long as she doesn't kill the 3 parents. It seems like the final showdown will be Jennifer and Derek versus Scott and Deucalion. Allison and Isaac arrive at the Nemeton and start to untie the parents, but the storm causes the cellar to start to collapse. Meanwhile, at the loft, Lydia and Cora realize the twins are still alive when they aren't merged together. I guess only their combined form is dead? Jennifer and Derek arrive at the final showdown, and Derek tries to assure Scott that he's unwillingly helping her. While it seems like a 2-on-2, it's really more like a 3-on-1. Deucalion shifts and the fighting starts. He easily beats both Derek and Jennifer, but the lunar eclipse happens and Deucalion loses all of his power momentarily. Jennifer is about to kill him, but Derek plays up Jennifer's past and says that Deucalion hasn't really seen how she's suffered. So he convinces her to heal his eyes before she kills him. She does, and then she goes all woozy. In one of Derek's strokes of genius, he realizes that since he got so weak by healing Korra, maybe Jennifer would get weak by healing Deucalion too. She isn't able to recover enough before the eclipse ends, so she throws down a line of mountain ash to protect herself. Scott uses his true alpha power to break the mountain ash line and properly ascend to alpha status. As he's explaining how he didn't need to kill anyone to do it, Deucalion goes and slashes her throat. With Jennifer's supposed death, the storm stops just in time for Styles to show up and help the others at the root cellar. All of our parents live, and they tell Scott to bring a ladder. Derek is able to convince Deucalion not to go around killing people anymore, so they don't kill him and they let him go. This seems like a really stupid idea, but it works out in the end. Allison and Chris have a conversation where they come up with a new hunter code for their family.
We protect those who cannot protect themselves.
Derek and Korra leave, and Scott says he doesn't know if Derek is ever coming back. Spoilers, he does, but she doesn't. As 3A ends, we get one last scene with Jennifer crawling to the Nematon and begging it to give her one last bit of power like it did before. She's stopped by Peter, who kills her for good and declares himself an alpha. He's not, but he likes to think he is. This episode is great, and the way that both Scott and Derek are able to trick the bad guys despite their clear physical disadvantage is great. I've always been a big fan of the time Scott does something similar in the second season, so to have it happen again here is just icing on the cake. I also like that they keep Deucalion alive, and both the twins end up sort of being redeemed by the end, so not every single villain ends up in the grave. It's nice to have a handful of redeemed villains, so I'm all here for this. If I was ranking this season on its own, it would definitely still go above both Season 1 and Season 2, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. We'll cover the actual ranking for the season at the end of the video as usual. We've still got another half of the season to go. While there's plenty in 3A that I don't like, it is the start of the peak of the series, so I can't emphasize enough that it's just really good. We dropped Jackson this season, so if we look at our core 5 cast members, they're all alive by the end of 3A. We'll add Isaac in here with the core cast and throw Boyd a bone since the show likes to pretend he was important but didn't really follow through on that. Shame they killed him off right after giving him an actual backstory. Our prominent side characters and villains go here as usual, and unlike the first few seasons, we get quite a few who actually survive through the end. We can say bye-bye to Korra too, since she's jumping ship for a series about Mary, Queen of Scots. Nothing too prominent from our other characters, and all our parents up to this point are still alive, so that's a plus. Shout out to the dog Bullet for being absolutely adorable, and to Paige for being as interesting as she could be with what she got. I also messed up and didn't give Lydia's dad an X in the last video, so I'll give it to him now. He's mentioned but never seen again. There's tons of victims in this half of the season, and most of them have names, so we'll drop them here. I hate that Mr. Harris is dead, but we didn't get that darn X because we'll be seeing him much later in the movie, just when you think we finally got rid of the guy. Like last time, I want to talk about a few notable characters on their own before I jump into some of the ships from the season. There's quite a few, so we're only going to touch on the ones that are relevant only to 3A for now, and then the ones that cover all 24 episodes we'll talk about at the end after we go through 3B. We can't really talk about 3A without bringing up Korra. I mentioned very briefly in my Steric video that some fans look at Korra as essentially Girl Derek, which, ouch, but it's also not necessarily wrong. It does seem like Korra was added to the show as a second thought. In the first season, when Derek talks about his family and the fire that killed them all, he makes no mention of any siblings other than his older sister Laura. He even says that he and Laura were at school when the fire happened. So where was Korra? She would have been about 10 years old, and so why wasn't she in school? Why isn't this addressed? Realistically, we can add this to the list of reasons the Teen Wolf timeline is a mess, but Korra's addition ultimately comes across more as a means to stop Steric shippers rather than any meaningful attempt to add a new character. Adelaide Kane is a decent actress here, but she has absolutely nothing to work with. She has that weird thing where she just randomly gets terminally ill from fighting Aiden and or the Duroc, and Derek has to help her. It goes absolutely nowhere, and it's a lame excuse to take the alpha power away from Derek around the same time that Scott will get his own. She has all the same character traits as Derek, ostensibly the same backstory as Derek, without the Predator Ant involvement, and in the end adds practically nothing to the season but more question. And then Adelaide Kane goes and books a leading role on a different show and leaves the season immediately, never to be seen or heard from for the entire rest of the series. Not even in the movie, where it may have been nice to include some more Hale family members. She picks up the pieces of Erica's lost storyline and then she drops them right again for someone else to pick up in the second half of this season, but we'll get to that later. This might be a hot take, but Jennifer is actually my favorite villain in the series. Her motivations are solid, and even though she's going around murdering people left and right, you still feel bad for her when you hear her backstory. It helps the main alpha she has beef with is so irritating. I don't really like her with Derek, and we'll get to that in a minute, but on her own, I think she's pretty compelling as a villain. The threefold sacrifices are a super tense part of the series, and she has personal tension with all 5 of the core characters. She kidnaps Scott's mom, Allison's dad, and Stiles' dad, so she directly influences all 3 of them. She tries to murder Lydia, and she has her whole dating thing with Derek. She's the first villain in the series who has this connection to literally every single one of the main cast members, and they clearly learn from this because from this point onward, all of the good villains have that same strong connection to the main characters. I've made it known in the past that I really enjoy the magical aspects of Teen Wolf, and Jennifer is the biggest time that this is used in the show. We'll get into this way later when we look at the Teen Wolf movie, but it's also mildly possible that she's the mother of Derek's child, so that's fun. All in all, great villain. It's kind of a shame that Teen Wolf tends to dispose of the villains after one season of appearance, and I kind of wish she got the Peter treatment and came back to life somewhere down the line. Now that's a Teen Wolf movie I would have liked. The Alpha Pack is also one of the best additions to the series, and all 5 of them are memorable in their own way. Obviously, Ethan and Aiden have a big benefit here since they're the ones we see around the most, and they have the strongest personal connections to characters we enjoy, like Lydia and Danny. Ultimately though, their gimmick of merging together is pretty interesting, but after their little visit to the Jennifer chiropractor at the end of 3A, they can't really do that anymore. Ennis is probably the least memorable one, and he departs the series a little earlier than the others, but he does have the added benefit of being involved in Derek's backstory with Paige, so while he doesn't seem as necessary, they do a good job trying to keep him relevant even after he dies. Kali is also memorable since she's the reason the Alpha Pack is connected to the Duroc at all, and while I personally hate all the time the camera focuses on her nasty feet, I think it's neat to include a character that has werewolf claws on all 4 of their limbs. Kind of a shame they never really use this for characters later, but I guess it's supposed to be her thing. Of course, Deucalion is a standout here with the sexy accent and the most memorable moments. I admit I do cringe a little seeing the demon wolf moment, but depending on how you look at it, it could be pretty cool. His eyes are healed by the end of 3A, but spoiler, they do mention when he makes an appearance later that this was only temporary. I guess they realized he's mildly more interesting when he's blind, so they decided to undo the biggest change to his character at the end. Still, the whole Alpha Pack is an excellent addition to the catalog of villains, and I do actually believe that, while there are other villains that are stronger individually, and we will get to that very soon, the combo of the Duroc and the Alpha Pack is the strongest set of villains we ever see in the series. There, that's the hot take of the video. If we jump over to our ship outlook, we can see some of the major ships that Season 3 has so far. Like with the characters, we're just going to look at the 3A characters for now. To start, we have Lydia and Peter. I put a note in the Season 2 video that I accidentally forgot to include it in that one, so I'll bring it up now. Thankfully, I don't have too much to say. I really like when we meet the hallucination of young Peter in the second season, but I am personally not a huge fan of Lydia and Peter beyond that, and once we find out who exactly that young guy is, the ship takes a pretty steep dive for me. It isn't even about the age gap thing, though it is a little hypocritical that people tend to bag on Starrick for the age gap when there are multiple age gap relationships in the show that are usually glossed over otherwise. 2 of them include Lydia. What's up with that? I just don't like that Peter always seems to be manipulating her. In the first season, he straight up attacks her in order to get Stiles' assistance in tracking Derek, and then he uses the bite he gave her to manipulate her post-mortem into resurrecting him from the dead. He explains later this was his plan all along, and that Lydia was a backup, but I simply do not buy that based on what we've actually seen on the screen. I really do think he was fully intending to kill her in the first season and shifted gears once he realized he could use her to manipulate Styles. They realized Peter was a fan favorite after that first season and brought him back to life in the second. It's kind of the first hint of Lydia's Banshee powers, but it's never explained in real detail, and nothing like this ever happens again, so it really comes across as a half-ditch effort to bring back a fan favorite rather than to characterize either one of them. And beyond the manipulation, their relationship doesn't really have any substance. They only really flirted when he was the young hallucination, and he wasn't even real. It's not the absolute worst ship this show has, thankfully we passed that in the first season, but it's pretty dang low. Derek and Jennifer had a lot of promise too, but I wasn't super into them by the end either. It's not just because I shipped Derek. It has a lot more to do with Derek being my favorite character though. We know, even if it's glossed over beyond season 1, that Derek was manipulated and tricked by Kate into giving her information that led to the death of his entire family. She seduced him, and it worked. The thing I hate the most is that it's sort of implied that Jennifer uses her Duroc abilities to seduce Derek here too. It seems throughout the season that their connection was genuine, especially in the scenes that we see at first, but other than when he rescues her in the boiler room, every single one of the times they interact is after she has already sacrificed the virgin. And as I mentioned earlier, it isn't super clear what power the virgin sacrifice gave her. It's implied in the scene with the sheriff that she can use this to seduce people, and therefore this may be how she seduced Derek. If she did, I hate this. I hate that Derek, who has been seduced in the past to fatal results, gets his very first love interest and she turns out to be a serial killer who also seduces him. I hate that. And to think they seem to get along so well. If this isn't what we're supposed to conclude from this, then I kind of liked them together before she turned out to be a serial killer, obviously. I think she's intentionally meant to look kind of like an older version of Paige, and it's kind of implied this might be what Derek likes about her, or even deliberate on her part since she does know about Paige's death by Derek's hand. When Kali sees her and they hold her hostage for a minute to do the whole thing where they kill Boyd, she doesn't recognize her in the slightest at first, so we can assume that she doesn't look the same she used to. So maybe she took some of Paige's visual into her future identity. There's also a very small subsect of people who call Jennifer Girl Styles, since she's a pretty brown-haired woman with a slightly upturned nose. Do I think this has any real merit? Not entirely. Like I said, I do believe she's meant to look similar to Paige, and Paige is the one that I think deliberately looks like Styles. So in a roundabout way, I guess that's true, but it doesn't have anything to do with Jennifer herself. In short, I like them together up until her evil reveal, but then they lose some points for me. I mentioned a little bit earlier that people tend to refer to Cora as Girl Derek, and that most people tend to look at the relationship between Styles and Cora as a homophobic attempt to de-gay this Derek relationship. While that might be going a little far, I do think it's a little hard to argue at times. I already mentioned that Cora is really similar to Derek, and this was around the time that the showrunners and the production staff seemed to start to turn against the whole Derek thing, so it's not unreasonable to assume that might be the case. If Cora didn't leave the series and eventually grew to have her own storyline, this might have not been so damning, but with what we actually got, I have to rank this one pretty low just based on principle. I like Derek, so you'd think I'd be into another version of it, but I cannot support the low-effort attempt to de-gay the most popular ship of the series. Overall, I think Season 3A is really solid. It's got the best group of villains, and it doesn't add too much confusing nonsense. Plus, it has arguably the most important moment of the series when Scott, Styles, and Allison sacrifice themselves to power that damn Nemeton. It really is going to be a thorn in their side for the rest of time. Now for the half of the season I'm sure most of you have been waiting for. Starting with 3B, Teen Wolf aired alongside a post-show special called Wolf Watch, which was hosted by the fan-favorite actress of Kate Argent, the lovely Jill Wagner. It's a shame her character is so awful because she seems really nice. In Wolf Watch, they would recount the events of the episode and have some further discussion. In these videos, we won't really be touching on anything that they bring up there, but if you are going through with your own rewatch, I do recommend checking those out. It's a great way to get more familiar with the cast and some of the production team, and they really are a highlight of this series. Episode 13 starts off our second half of the season, and it's only been a few weeks in canon since the events of 3A. Styles wakes from a nightmare with Lydia lying beside him. He explains to her that he had a nightmare within a nightmare, and he realizes that his closet door is open. He gets up to close it and Lydia protests. He goes through the door and finds himself at the Nemeton. He wakes up one more time from his nightmare within a nightmare within a nightmare. Inception could never. At school, he tells Scott he isn't sure if he even woke up, and then he wakes up one more time in his room, being comforted by his dad. We're officially in the psychological terror territory of the series, so it's going to get so much worse for our character. Scott prepares to go to school, and he has some hallucinations about his shadow revealing his werewolf self, and then he has his playful argument with Isaac about whether or not he's interested in Allison. Remember, Isaac was the one who was paired up with Allison during the sacrifice, because they have a sort of sexual tension going on. Stiles is getting ready for school too, and he notices that he can't read anymore. The letters are all jumbled around, and sometimes they slide off the pages. Scott and Stiles aren't the only ones having issues, though. As Allison prepares for school, she has a hallucination where she sees her aunt crawling towards her like a horror movie ghost. The three of them meet up in the school, and they conclude that they're all having the hallucinations because of the sacrifice. The sheriff, meanwhile, is investigating some cold cases because of his whole new knowledge of the supernatural, and one case in particular. He looks down at a photo of a little girl with the name labeled Malia Tate. At school, we meet the new history teacher who is taking over for the one that was sacrificed in 3A. This is Mr. Yukimura, and he seems like a nice guy. He accidentally embarrasses his daughter, Kira, who happens to be in his class. After a bunch more hallucinations associated with their sacrifice, including one where everyone uses sign language to talk to Stiles, the group gather together and discuss what's going on. The new girl, Kira, overhears them and tries to offer some information from Tibetan Buddhism, that what they're describing might be bardo, which is a state of being between life and death. Scott and Stiles visit Deaton to find out how to stop the hallucination. Stiles relays the sign language thing from his hallucination, and Deaton explains it may be a clue that a door in their mind is still open, kind of like that closet door at the beginning of the episode. As long as the door is open, they may be visited by bad things. He warns them they should close the doors in their mind as soon as possible. The sheriff shows up at the clinic looking for Scott to help him solve the Malia Tate case. Since he's aware of the whole werewolf thing now, he thinks Scott might be able to use the scent to find new clues. They go to the Tate family's house, but they leave without any new leads. Later, Melissa returns home to Scott yelling at his dad. Since the whole serial killer English teacher thing was resolved, his dad has been sticking around out of his personal agenda to get Stiles' dad fired from his job. Scott and Stiles go into the woods to find the car wreck from the Malia Tate investigation. They find a doll in the wreck, and Scott notices glowing eyes watching them. He chases after it, and it's revealed to be a coyote with the telltale shapeshifter blue eyes. Scott concludes that this might be Malia, but she runs off. Elsewhere, Peter and Derek are strung up and being tortured with electricity. Derek really cannot catch a break. I wouldn't put this episode on the same level as the opening for 3A, but it does introduce almost everything that will be important for this half of the season. We get our newest main character, Kira, a look at the troubles plaguing all three of our sacrifice subjects, and a tease at what we can expect from Derek this season. There really isn't much for Lydia, but that's to be expected at this point. If we identify a focus character for each season, I'd say that Lydia had her time in 3A, with Scott for Season 1 and Jackson for Season 2. Who is the focus character for 3B? Well, the fact that this episode focuses more on Stiles' hallucinations than the others might be the biggest clue. In the next episode, we pick back up with Derek and Peter, who are still being electrocuted. This is our first introduction to a new hunting family, the Calaveras. She cuts off one of Peter's fingers and tells them that she'll only ask 9 more times. Haha. Scott continues to chase the coyote, and Stiles shows him the coyote den that is full of Malia's clothes and some of her toys. Scott realizes that Malia won't come back to the den now that their scent is all over it, but he's too nervous of losing control to shift in order to find her. They call the sheriff and then tell him their theory about the coyote actually being Malia. Of course, he can't turn around and tell this to the other cops, so he gets berated by Scott's dad about his inability to close cases. Dick. At school, Kira approaches Scott and tells him that she spent some time researching bardo. Her dad shows up and embarrasses her again, but Scott seems kind of into it. In class, Mr. Yukimura teaches a little about Japanese internment camps during World War II. This is relevant to the plot of the season, so stay in school, kids. Stiles has another hallucination during class and runs out, with Scott following. Because they left their things behind, Kira picks up their bags and goes to bring it to them, only to encounter the coyote in the hallway of the school. Scott protects her and notices that Stiles' backpack has been torn open and one of the dolls from the coyote den is sticking out. Back with Derek and Peter, there are crashing sounds and Brayden shows up to break them out. She has officially survived her run-in with Deucalion all the way back in the 3A premiere, and has been hired by Deucalion of all people to get these two back to Beacon Hills. As they leave, Peter grabs his finger and puts it back on, and they bring a big chest with them. At the very end of the episode, they open the chest to reveal a small cylindrical box that is made of the wood from the Nematon and has the Hail Pack Triskelion on top. At the school, Malia's dad shows up and he is not looking great. He makes veiled threats about the coyote and demands they find and kill it for killing his daughters. Later, he sets up a bunch of bear traps in the woods. Scott and the gang go to Deaton, who gives them tranquilizers they can use to catch the coyote. After catching her, Scott should be able to use his alpha powers to turn her back into a human, if she is one. Since Derek gave up his alpha spark and the twins got their alpha neck snapped, Scott is the only one who can do this, which isn't great considering he doesn't have a lot of control right now. Scott goes to the twins for help controlling his alpha, and they give him advice he does not want to hear. The gang all go into the woods to track down the coyote, and Stiles realizes that the doll he took from the wreckage was like taking flowers from a grave. The coyote is just trying to get the doll back so it can put them back at the wreck site. Allison uses the tranquilizers to shoot Mr. Tate before he can kill the coyote, and Scott chases after it into the woods. Lydia steps on one of the bear traps, and there's a very tense moment when Stiles is unable to disarm it because his hallucinations make him unable to read the instruction. He gets out just before the jaws snap shut. Hopefully that doesn't happen to anyone else. Scott chases the coyote and allows himself to shift. He roars at the coyote and it turns back into a girl. They were right. It was Malia this whole time. She's been living in the woods for about 8 years as a coyote. The sheriff brings Malia back to her father and the two reunite happily. Because he was able to close the case, he gets to keep his job as sheriff for the time being. To close out the episode, we see a mysterious figure at the nematon, plucking sprigs that are sprouting from the stump. Some fireflies fly out and turn into shadowy human shapes. This is one of our quote-unquote villains for the season, but we'll see more of that soon. This episode is solid, though I think the first 2 episodes of 3B are easily the weakest. The whole thing with Derek and Peter and the entire plot with Malia don't tie directly to the main villains or conflict of the season, so it's a bit of a letdown that we have to wait almost 2 entire episodes before we get a taste of what to come. I understand this decision. They want to build up the storyline with Scott, Allison, and Stiles having their hallucinations and the effects it's having on them. But at the end of this episode, both Scott and Allison have pretty much completely overcome their issues and closed the doors in their mind, though it's a little less clear with Allison. Stiles is the one to watch out for, since while he's been able to decipher the bear trap in the end, it's not because he overcame his inability to read. The next episode starts with a prisoner being transported from the prison to the hospital. One of the inmates needs surgery, and no other hospital will take him. This is William Barrow, a mass killer who used shrapnel bombs to kill a bunch of kids on a school bus. Melissa preps him for surgery, and he is so creepy. He talks about how he killed the kids because they had glowing eyes, which kind of sounds like some other characters we know. You might recognize this actor from his work in many different movies where he usually plays creatures, like in Hellboy and The Shape of Water or Pan's Labyrinth. He does an excellent job of being creepy even though he's just a dude in it. It's the night before Halloween, which the characters have dubbed Mischief Night, and Stiles is in the school setting up a prank for Coach. When school starts, Ethan and Aiden try to convince Scott to let them join his pack, but Scott doesn't really want to let them in because they don't trust them after the whole murdering Boyd and Erica thing, which, justified. Coach falls victim to Stiles' prank, which includes a small present on his desk that is full of nuts and bolts. When he picks it up, it trips a wire and makes everything in his office fall over. In the class itself, Lydia hears some flies buzzing. Back at the hospital, the murderer goes into surgery, where they open him up and find a bunch of flies inside of his chest. In the ensuing panic, he escapes from the hospital. When the sheriff arrives to investigate, he and Melissa realize he's probably going to the high school to kill more kids with glowing eyes. At Derek's loft, he opens the container that they retrieved in the previous episode and dumps out large claws. He says they're his mother's and that he needs Peter to stick them onto his fingers and then stick them into Derek's neck so he can ask her a question. He does, and Derek gets the chance to talk to her, though we ultimately don't see what they talk about in this episode. We find out later that the Hale family considered themselves protectors of Beacon Hills, which leads to Derek's new motivation to stay in Beacon Hills and protect it. At least for now. Back at the school, William Barrow is revealed to have made it to the school and is in hiding in one of the closets. Scott enlists the help of all the supernatural he knows at school, as well as Stiles and Allison, to track down Barrow. Stiles and Lydia realize that Barrow may be intending to blow the entire school up via the boiler, so he pulls the fire alarm to get everyone out of the building. Kira doesn't hear the fire alarm because she has her headphones on, and we see Barrow watching her from between the bookshelves. Later, Kira's dad invites Scott to their house for dinner, as thanks for helping save her from the coyote. We meet her mother, played by Tamlyn Tomita of Karate Kid 2 fame, and we learn that she has family ties to Beacon Hills going back generations, and that Mr. Yukimura took on her last name because her lineage is very unique. Lydia doubts her banshee abilities because they were unable to find Barrow at the school, so she and Styles go back to investigate further. They check the chemical storage next to the science classroom and realize that Barrow was able to hide there because the chemicals hid his scent from the werewolves. They see some atomic numbers on the board and they decipher the clue to say Kira. Scott leaves Kira's house and they're saying goodbye on the street when Barrow runs up and knocks Scott out. They realize that Barrow took Kira to a power substation and they arrive just in time for Barrow to approach Kira with a live wire and get thrown back. Kira appears to absorb the electricity and the entire town loses power. Back at the Argent's apartment, Allison and Isaac flirt. When the power goes out, 3 shadowy figures appear and attack him. This episode is great, and I think Barrow makes a really good minor antagonist. The thing with the flies comes up later, so at the risk of minor spoilers, we know that he is being manipulated by our second villain for the season. Plus, we get another appearance by our first villains when they jump Isaac. I've also got to point out that Kira is great, and Arden Cho, who is so underappreciated at the time that this season aired. The way she's treated, both in writing and some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, is pretty rough, but Kira is a ball of energy that is nice to see. Especially with how serious 3B has been so far, her brightness is infectious and I'm glad she's here. This is also where I'll show my ass a little and admit that I think Scott and Kira are my favorite pairing for Scott. Kira doesn't really get a chance to be with anyone other than him, so I guess he's my favorite partner for her too. I think I just find her storyline to be more compelling than the standard Romeo and Juliet thing we see with Scott and Allison. Next up, it's officially Halloween and we pick up right where we left off with Isaac. Argent and Allison are able to trigger his werewolf healing, so he'll be okay. Argent also recognizes the way that Isaac describes the creatures, so you bet that will come up later in the season. Scott's dad questions them all about the events of the power substation, but he doesn't get any information. He does, however, take Kira's phone into evidence, which is not good because the murderer took pictures of her supernatural form on the phone. She even shows Scott, so we get to see what she's got to reveal. Later, Kira talks to Scott and he agrees to help her to get her phone back from the FBI. At school, Styles finds a key on his keyring that he doesn't recognize, but he doesn't tell anyone about it just yet. Danny has been trying to set up a blacklight party for Halloween, but the big power outage has ruined his plans. Ethan and Aiden have decided that if they want to get into Scott's pack, then they need to be nice to people. And they've still got a thing for Danny and Lydia respectively, so they tell Danny they have somewhere for his party and a generator. A bonus. Derek is attacked and incapacitated by the same shadow creatures that came for Isaac, which is convenient because Ethan and Aiden plan on using Derek's loft for the blacklight party. Scott and Kira break into the police office with Styles' help and retrieve Kira's phone. While they're there, they look at some information on Agent McCall's computer. They barely get out undetected when Scott's dad shows up to pick up some files. At the blacklight party, pretty much every teenager we know is there, including Allison and Isaac, who flirt some more with the blacklight paint. Ethan is going out of his way to help Danny and gets attacked by the shadow creatures in a back room. Lydia also gets attacked out on the balcony, and both Danny and Aiden find her before she dies of exposure. Styles has a conversation with Caitlin, who returns one last time since her appearance in 3A, and realizes that there are chemicals on his keys that make them glow, but he isn't sure where the chemicals may have come from. Allison and Isaac find Ethan, and they realize that all the characters who have been attacked by the shadow creatures have a mark behind their ear. It looks like a 5, but we'll find out what it means later. Derek, who is recovered, shows back up at his loft and shuts down the party. While all our familiar characters stick around, the shadow creatures show up and put the same marking on Aiden, but they don't get to Scott yet. Lastly, Styles goes back to the school and realizes that the key with the chemicals on it is to the storage room where William Barrow hid during the last episode. Apparently, Styles is the one who let him into the school, gave him a place to hide, and wrote Kira's name on the board for him to target. This episode is great, and it pretty much starts a trend of episodes that just get good and stay good. The entire rest of the season is just really banger after banger, and it's mostly because of the emphasis on Styles. Styles has always been one of the most popular characters, and fans really responded to every little bit of backstory we get of him, and Dylan O'Brien has yet to really get a chance to flex his acting ability. But this season lays that to rest. If there's any doubt why people like Styles or why they like Dylan O'Brien, just watch this season. We also get some extra information about the shadow creatures, and it's clear that Argent knows a lot more than he's letting on. Shippers of pretty much any queer Styles ship also rejoice, since there's a moment where it's implied that he may be bisexual. Some call it queerbaiting since this doesn't ultimately go anywhere, but that's a discussion for another video. Perhaps one that is already out. Episode 17 is largely a story about Chris Argent's backstory. Since hearing the details about the monsters that attacked Isaac, he has been making connections and putting pieces into place. When he was younger on his very first arms deal, he met with a Japanese yakuza. While the deal was happening, a group of Oni attacked and killed the man he was there to deal with. These Oni look just like the ones we've been seeing, though they aren't exactly the same one. We'll find out where our Oni came from later, but yay, we know what they are. Too bad we don't know what they want yet. Argent survived the attack, obviously, and he also saved a man with the codename Silverfinger by shooting a silver bullet into the Oni's mask. With that in mind, back in the present, Scott takes Kira home from the police station. They have a flirty moment, and the next day he is getting followed around by Ethan and Aiden. They claim they're protecting him from the Oni, but Scott doesn't believe them. Stiles tries to tell Scott about the whole key thing, and the chalkboard thing too, but when he tries to show him the key, it isn't there anymore. He thinks something else is wrong because the prank he played on Coach is very reminiscent of the way William Barrow put a shrapnel bomb on a bus. Argent plans to get information out of Silverfinger in the present, so he sets up a weapons deal and has Isaac play the role of dealer. During the deal, things immediately go south because of course they do, and it's mostly because Silverfinger has a werewolf on his team named Kincaid. He's got a super deep voice and is also very large. Stiles goes to the hospital because of all his hallucinations, and Mrs. McCall gives him a sedative so he can actually sleep. We get a heart-wrenching moment where he calls Melissa his mom and he goes to sleep. She takes note of his symptoms and leaves him be. Since the Oni come out at night, Scott brings Kira to his house and has a plan to set up a line of mountain ash so the Oni can't get in. He has a theory that they're looking for Kira, but we'll see. Kira reveals to Scott that she believes she's a kitsune, which is our official new creature for the season, and an excellent addition to the series. Scott's dad shows up, which is completely against the plan, just as the sun starts to go down. Mrs. McCall shows up just as the Oni appear and stab Mr. McCall through the back. They're able to fight it back, and Melissa uses some mountain ash to make the barrier. Argent, Allison, and Isaac get the information they need and learn the mark that the Oni are leaving on people's necks just means that they're still themselves. They're looking for someone who's possessed by a dark spirit called a nogitsune. It's a kind of evil kitsune that gets powers from chaos and strife and pain. Allison calls and relays this information to Scott, who gets his mom to break the barrier so the Oni can check him and Kira. They do, and they're both given that mark, so they're in the clear. At the hospital, Stiles wakes up from his nap and is attacked by the Oni in the hallway. However, he quickly stops them and even kills 3 of them. Stiles is possessed by the nogitsune, though Scott appears and can't tell the difference. This episode is great. The Oni are basically one of our villains, though you could probably argue that since they're being controlled to do the things they do, and that person isn't necessarily a villain, that they aren't. But for the sake of my usual 2 villains in a season structure argument, we'll stick with it. The Nogitsune is often seen as the best villain of the series, and if we look back at the episodes of 3B we've already covered, it can be hard to figure out exactly when it takes control of Stiles, and how often does Stiles have control of himself. I would argue that at the very beginning of 3B, when Stiles has the multi-layered nightmare when he fails to close the door, is when the possession really happened. We know that the Nogitsune can sit back in his mind when it wants, and I think that all the actions past this point indicate that it's present in his mind. His inability to read, and his unknowing actions letting Barrow into the school and telling him to kill Kira are all evidence that he's fighting over true control of his body with something else. We find out later that it can take full control of him when he falls asleep. Sure, before that there are moments when it has control, but once he's sedated, it's pretty much just the Nogitsune's game from here on out. Disclaimer, episode 18 is my favorite episode in the entire series. It might not seem as amazing as I swear it is based on this recap, but I promise it is really great. At the start of the episode, Scott gets a phone call from Stiles, who doesn't know where he is and thinks he's been sleepwalking. Stiles can't recognize where he is because it's so dark, and there's something stuck on his leg so he can't move. He says there's an awful smell and begs Scott to find him without telling Stiles' dad. Scott wakes Isaac up and they immediately jump into action. Lydia is with Aiden, but she hears Stiles' voice telling her to come find him. It does not bode well that she is hearing Stiles' voice when she has that connection to death. Scott and Isaac get to Stiles' room, but Lydia and Aiden are already there. In place of his bed are some scissors stabbed through the mattress, which are connected with red string to evidence all over the room. Lydia convinces Scott to get help from the sheriff, so he heads to the police station. Finally, we see Stiles in his dark place. It appears to be a basement, and there is a bear trap stuck on his leg. He's not alone, and a strange bandaged person is telling him riddles and taunting him. The sheriff is clearly upset about Stiles' disappearance, as any good parent would be, so he gets the deputies to search everywhere. We briefly see a new character, Deputy Parrish, who will become more important later in the series, but for now he's just a little guy. The entire group look for Stiles to no avail. At the station, Agent McCall starts to put some pieces together that nobody else has. The sheriff goes with Lydia, who has another auditory hallucination and thinks that Stiles is in the basement of a place called Aiken House, which is a mental health facility that will be frustratingly important for seasons to come. They show up at the basement of the facility, which looks just like the one we've seen in the scenes with Stiles, but he isn't there. Behind one of the walls, we see the remains of a person covered in bandages, just like the one telling riddles to Stiles. Thankfully though, the sheriff and Lydia went to the wrong place. Agent McCall is able to find Stiles in the coyote den. Isaac goes to Allison's since she hasn't been helping this whole time, and the two of them hear a message on her phone that's spoken in Japanese. They take it to Kira's dad at the school and learn that it's an announcement from a Japanese internment camp, though, according to him, it's from one that doesn't exist, called Oak Creek. Derek finds Kira at the school and has a theory that Stiles isn't actually possessed by the dark spirit, but rather that Kira is. I guess he didn't get the memo that she was checked by the Oni and came back clear, but okay. Kira takes him to the power substation and they find Stiles' metal bat, which proves that there's something connecting the murderer William Barrow with Stiles, so they go to the hospital to check on Scott and Stiles. At the hospital, Melissa and the sheriff discuss Stiles' symptoms. They're very similar to the ones Stiles' mother displayed when she was suffering from frontotemporal dementia, and they worry that Stiles might have it too. He goes into the MRI machine to determine if he does, but he disappears right after the results appear to be the same as his mom's. He's got it, and it's not good. On the roof of the hospital, they find evidence that someone, probably Stiles, has tampered with the power lines of the hospital. At the moment Stiles disappears, the cables explode and whip around, sending the entire hospital into a blackout. In the hallways of the hospital, possessed Stiles comes face to face with Kira's mom, who he seems to recognize. The Oni appear next to her and she declares that she will not be stopped by him choosing a teenager as a host. This episode is just so good. We finally get the reveal of all the players for the season, and all the moments with the search for Stiles are amazing, and we get one of the most heart-wrenching parts of the series when Stiles is at the hospital and getting tested for dementia. It really checks every box. It's not even just because Stiles is so great and Dylan O'Brien is an amazing actor, but every single person was on their A-game during this episode. You really feel it with Lyndon Ashby especially, whose scenes in the hospitals are so good. It's up there with Mrs. Argent's death in the second season as one of my personal saddest moments of the series. From this point on, I'm going to be referencing the possessed form of Stiles as Void Stiles, which isn't actually mentioned by name this season, but is the fandom's name for it and was adopted as the official term by the creators later in the series. The nogitsune is the creature, but Void Stiles is the body of Stiles possessed by the creature. Similar, but sort of different. Got it? Cool. In the next episode, we see Dr. Deaton, who has gone back to the garden from Chris Argent's backstory and has collected some wolf lichen, which he says is to poison the nogitsune inside of Stiles. Back at the Beacon Hills Hospital, the power lines that exploded in the last episode fly down into the parking lot, electrocuting a bunch of people, including Isaac. Kira is able to absorb the electricity to stop anyone else from getting hurt, but Derek points out that Isaac is not breathing. Stiles has gone missing again, and he sends a text to his dad saying not to look for him. The fact that he's unaccounted for is not good since he's possessed by an evil spirit and could be up to who knows what. Well, we know what, because Stiles shows up at the school and tells Scott that he's worried about what he's been up to. He has a bag full of rope and a map of the cross-country running trail, just in time for cross-country practice. Derek confronts Argent at his place since he found one of the hunting tools at his loft. We just saw Stiles with one recently, so we can assume it's the nogitsune playing tricks on people and sowing strife. Derek and Argent establish an uneasy truce, but they are quickly apprehended by the FBI and taken to the police station. At cross-country practice, the fruits of Void Stiles' labor are revealed when Coach is shot in the stomach with an arrow. Stiles gets Scott to take the coach's pain, and Coach passes out. Lydia and Allison meet with Peter at Derek's loft since Peter has been up to his scheming. He wants Lydia to use Talia's claws, which they recovered in the opening of 3B, since he believes she took a memory from him before she died. He says he'll help her by telling her how to control her powers if she helps him first. She agrees, and she uses her banshee scream to drown out the noise and listen to the claws. You make that make sense. Peter gets insistent about what she heard, and she tells him that he's a father. But Allison defends her and they leave. In the car, she reveals that Malia, the were-coyote from the beginning of 3B, is Peter's secret daughter. The sheriff shows up at the cross-country practice and they find some wrapping paper in Stiles' Jeep. Realizing he may have set up a shrapnel bomb like William Barrow, the sheriff calls Deputy Parrish in as bomb squad member to check one of the buses at the school. We learn a little about Parrish's backstory, mostly that he's former bomb squad from Afghanistan, but the box on the bus isn't a bomb. It's just the sheriff's nameplate. The real bomb is at the sheriff's station, and it goes off just after Derek and Argent are handcuffed to a bench. Derek protects Argent and takes most of the shrapnel to his back, and it also kills a ton of deputies, proving once again that this is the last place you want to be transferred if you work with the police. At the school, Kira's mom reveals some hidden daggers, which she says represent her kitsune tails. When she snaps them, it summons the Oni. She snaps 2 more to make up for the 3 that have already been defeated, which leaves her with 1 dagger left. The main characters arrive at the remnants of the sheriff's station, and Scott takes more pain from a dying deputy. Since the sun is going down and Styles still hasn't been checked by the Oni and they think they'll kill him, Scott decides to take him to the animal clinic so they can hide inside the mountain ash barrier. A similar plan to what he did with Kira in the previous episode. When they arrive, Void Styles knocks out Kira and stabs Scott through the stomach with Kira's sword. He says that he's been tricking Scott into absorbing pain all episode, and now he's going to take it himself and be stronger. Deaton finally shows up and injects the wolf lichen into Void Styles' neck. This is another fantastic episode, and the reveal at the end that Void Styles has been manipulating the events of the entire episode is excellent. The Nogitsune in general is one of the most devious and calculated villains in the series, and instead of just telling us that or retconning his cleverness like they do with Peter sometimes, they prove it here with his action. You think most of the episode that Styles is actually worried about what he's doing, but it's all an act. It's so well done. You could almost make multiple seasons of this. I hope they don't think it would work in a movie. Oh wait. Now that Void Styles has been poisoned with the wolf lichen, episode 20 is back to real Styles. At his own insistence, the sheriff checks him into Icon House, the mental health facility from that other episode, and says he'll be back in 72 hours. While he's gone, he's going to talk to a specialist about Styles' MRI results. Pretty much right away, one of the inmates ends their life at the mental health facility and the whole place is put in lockdown. We meet Styles' new roommate, Oliver, and Styles immediately regrets his decision to come here. Oliver also tells Styles that he swallowed a bug the other day. Nice. Styles tries to call his dad to come back and get him, but because of the patient who ended their life, the phones have all been shut off. There's a girl at the phone anyways, named Meredith, and Oliver says that she's weird. Styles also recognizes Malia, who has presumably been here since she was turned back into a human by Scott. She punches him and they're both restrained by orderly. Mrs. Morel appears and makes them let Styles go. Morel holds group therapy, and while it's happening, she sees the marks on Styles' neck from the wolf lichen. She warns him later that if the marks go away, then the Nogitsune will regain control of him, and if that happens, then she will kill him. Styles tries to go down to the basement, but he needs the keys of the head orderly, a nasty guy named Brunsky. He runs into Malia in the shower, and she agrees to help him in exchange for Scott's help turning her back into a coyote. She hasn't been able to control her shift and wants to abandon society again. She and Styles set up a fight with Oliver so they can take the keys, which works, and they break into the basement. While they're down there, the marks on Styles' neck appear to be almost gone. They go through a bunch of papers while they're down there, but they quickly give up and start making out. It's not outright confirmed, but it's heavily implied they have sex here, which wouldn't be super great considering they're in a mental health facility and not clear how much either of them are in their right mind. We'll touch on this in the ship outlook section later. They find the marking on the wall and break it to reveal the remains of a bandaged man, which Styles says is the Nogitsune he has been seeing in his head. In its pocket is a photo, and the girl in the photo looks a lot like Kira. Before they can do anything else, they're knocked over the head by Oliver, who says he's going to drill holes in their heads to let the evil spirits out. He's about to drill into Malia's head, but the Nogitsune takes Styles over again and makes him stop. It's implied that the bug Oliver swallowed the other day was a fly, which ties back to the flies found in William Barrow's stomach. While the Oni are linked to fireflies, the Nogitsune is linked to flies. He escapes Icon House, leaving Malia behind. Later, she leaves Icon House herself and plans to find Scott. The whole time, outside of Icon House, Scott and co are busy trying to retrieve a scroll from FBI evidence. They think the scroll might have the answer for how to kill the Nogitsune without hurting Styles. They plan a heist, and it doesn't go super well. The big guy with the deep voice, Kincaid, is there, and he wants it too. Ethan and Aiden show up to help, and they beat him up so they can take the scroll. They bring it to Deaton, who says the solution to stop the Nogitsune is to change the body of the host, which means they might be able to beat it by turning the host into a werewolf. There's a lot of mixed feelings about this episode, and it's mostly about how Icon House is portrayed as a mental health facility. It's really not great, and it does perpetuate a handful of really negative stereotypes about mental health facilities, but as we learn more about this place, we'll see a part of why it's so messed up. I'll give it a pass for now, but it's in my bad books. It's also partly about how you feel about Styles and Malia's time in the basement. Lots of people consider this very uncomfortable since Malia went missing when she was 8 years old, and it's not clear how old she is mentally, and the fact that she and Styles so quickly jump into possibly possibly sleeping with each other is a little concerning if you take that into account. Personally, I'd like to think that Malia has done a lot of work during her time here, since we know that Mrs. Morel is at least mostly competent as a counselor, so I'd hope that she has worked through any of the things stopping her from being on the same level as her peers. In the next season, she does join them in high school, so it's clear that she's at least in their peer group socially, even if she doesn't quite hit the academic requirement. The whole nogitsune thing also leaves some questions about Styles' mental state during the whole thing, so all around it's just very questionable. I won't judge you if you hate it, and I won't judge you if you don't mind it. A lot of the real vocal hate for this scene tends to come from Sterek shippers, since they don't want Styles or Derek to be with anyone else, but they tend to be in pretty bad faith, since Sterek has its own issues with consent because of the whole age gap thing. Styles and Malia prove to be a perfectly fine couple as the show progresses, so you can draw your own conclusions about how they start off. Like Derek's backstory in episode 3A, episode 21 acts mostly as a backstory episode for Kira's mother and gives us some really good background on what exactly is going on with the bad guys. Void Styles arrives at the school and takes the last of Noshiko's tales from the book they were hidden in. He doesn't snap it yet, but he takes it for later. Kira's mother tells Scott and Kira her story, and we find out that she's actually hundreds of years old. That girl who looked like Kira in the photo is actually her mother, Noshiko, and she was there during World War II at the Japanese internment camp that Mr. Yukimura lied to Allison and Lydia about. He said it wasn't real because he was trying to protect his wife's history. Malia has found Scott off-screen and delivered the photo to him so we can have them confront her mom about the truth. In 1943, Noshiko was at the internment camp Oak Creek alongside a large amount of other Japanese and Japanese Americans. The guards tend to take advantage of them, but one of the guards named Reese is quite nice. He's one of the good ones. He's also having a romantic dalliance with Noshiko. We learn that she occasionally steals supplies off the truck and hands them out to the other prisoners. We meet one of them in particular, Satomi, who sits and plays Go. She gets migraines about once a month and doesn't see eye to eye with Noshiko. One of the other women is Reiko, who you may recognize if you've ever played the game Until Dawn. In the present, Scott and Kira get angry with Noshiko because they think she's stalling. Once the sun goes down, she can make her Oni go after Styles. She tells them that it's her fault that the nogitsune even exists at all. Back in the past, pneumonia hits the internment camp and leads to the death of many prisoners, including this little boy who will now appear on the character wrap-up at the end of the video. Noshiko doesn't get sick because she's a kitsune, but they realize that the nasty guards from earlier have been selling the medicine on the black market. The prisoners riot and try to attack the guards and doctor for selling the medicine, which culminates in Satomi throwing a Molotov cocktail and burning Reese alive. It's also revealed that Satomi is a werewolf. We'll be seeing her next season. Reese is taken to Eichenhaus for treatment, but ultimately dies from his wounds. This is where we find out that Eichenhaus was part of Oak Creek, which explains part of its horrible past. Noshiko is shot during the riot, and while she doesn't die because of her kitsune healing powers, she is still put with the rest of the bodies and taken to a mass grave. While on the way, she calls for a dark spirit to take control of her body and get revenge on the guard. She gets what she wants, but not in the way she thought. The dark spirit does come, but it takes control of Reese's body and kills the guards. After it kills many more people, she fights the nogitsune and wins. We see that the nogitsune takes the form of a fly. She traps it in a jar and hid the jar in the roots of the nematon. Apparently, when Scott, Allison, and Styles sacrificed themselves in 3A, they unknowingly broke the jar and let the nogitsune out. Way to victim blame. In the present, Kira is able to repair her sword, which her mother says is the weapon they will need to kill the nogitsune. While all this has been happening, the sheriff has been looking for Styles because he disappeared from Eichenhaus. He also reveals that the brain scans from the MRI were fake and part of the nogitsune's tricks, thank God. Argent agrees to help Sheriff find Styles. They gather up all their non-lethal weapons and go to find him, but they're wary about walking into a trap. Remember, the nogitsune is very clever, so it may have something else planned. It doesn't take long to find Styles since he's showing up on security cameras that the sheriff installed in his bedroom. They go to his room and see the chessboard that Styles used to explain the supernatural to his dad. The pieces are labeled with the names of the main characters, and Isaac's piece is off the board due to his injury. He's still at the hospital and not doing well. For some reason, Derek's name is on the king, and he's very close to checkmate. I like this episode, but it might just be partly because I'm a recovering weeb and the Japanese storyline is really interesting. Especially in North America and the US in particular, I think the treatment of Japanese people during World War II is often overlooked, so it's pretty refreshing to have a show that's quite critical about how it all went down. It does not paint the internment camps in positive or even neutral light, and while it does have the white savior guard, it never paints the prisoners as people who deserve it or try to pass off the entire internment camp as necessary. I've had my disagreements with some of the writing choices on this show in the past, but this one is something I can really get behind. Episode 22 picks up right where we left off, and the sheriff is face to face with Void Styles in Derek's loft. Most of our main characters show up and attack Void Styles, but he easily fights them off. When Argent pulls his gun out, Void Styles uses all the infighting to make them turn on each other. Allison realizes that this is exactly what Void Styles wants, and the Oni show up to kill him. We don't see the fight, but in the aftermath, the Oni and Void Styles are gone. The Oni also hurt Derek, but no Derek dies counter. He's doing pretty well in 3B. At Aiken House, Noshiko looks at Reese's body in the wall. Void Styles shows up and they talk a little about his plan. He uses her dagger to cut open his stomach, letting out a ton of flies. We watch as the flies make their way inside a bunch of characters, including Isaac, Derek, Ethan, and Aiden. Isaac shows up at Allison's place, now taken over by the Nogitsune. He ties Allison to the bed and takes a bag of weapons with him to the school. Lydia and Aiden find Void Styles lying on the ground and take him to Scott's house. They paralyze him with Kanama venom and tie him up. Before they tape his mouth shut, he implies to Aiden that Ethan is in danger at the school, so Aiden goes off to find him. Peter shows up and Lydia agrees to tell him what she knows about his daughter if he helps them with Void Styles. He uses his claws to project Lydia and Scott into Styles' mind so she can find him and bring him out. It works, and Scott howls to get his attention. Void Styles spits up a bunch of bandages, and the figure of the Nogitsune appears to crawl out of the pile on the floor. The body that seems to be the Nogitsune is revealed to have been the real Styles, and the body that was still Void Styles has taken Lydia and left. Derek confronts Argent about his mother's death in the fire and continues to blame him for his entire family's death. He ties Argent up to a chair and is about to burn him alive, but he wants to wait so Allison can watch. At the school, Aiden and Ethan get into a fight about how bad they are at getting Scott to trust them, and Isaac shows up with the weapons. It's an all-out brawl as the three of them try to kill each other. Isaac gets the upper hand and is about to kill them to get revenge for Erica and Boyd, but Kira and Allison show up to stop him. When Styles is freed from the bandages, the Nogitsune's power over Derek, Isaac, Ethan, and Aiden is ended, and they all stop fighting. Whew. This episode is pretty good too, and it's no surprise seeing as they're all going to be good from this point on. Now, Styles and Void Styles are existing at the same time, in separate bodies, so we'll need to be extra careful with how we describe both of them. It's nice to have the real Styles back, and I like that both Scott and Lydia are the ones to get him back. It would have been a bit of a cheap shot if it was only Lydia, since we can tell they have a romance building up, but it would have been just as rough to make it only Scott. The three of them really are the core trio of the series, even if I wish Derek was there to help too. But he's got his own stuff going on. It's hard to push down the Derek shipper in me, okay? I'm trying. I think the whole flies thing that the Nogitsune is a little confusing though. We know the flies can influence people like it did with William Barrow and Oliver, but up until now they've only really been strong enough to manipulate people who were already mentally compromised. If it can just spawn hundreds of flies and possess anyone and everyone it wants, then why not do that? There's literally no downside to this plan. It required Void Styles to cut himself open, I guess, but it's implied that he can heal like other kitsunes, so this wouldn't stop him for long. It's one of the only real issues I have with the Nogitsune's plan, which is pretty nitpicky in the grand scheme of things, and that really just goes to show how great this villain is. We're nearing the end now, and hopefully you're not looking at the runtime of this video and seeing how much there still is to talk about. Void Styles has taken Lydia to the tunnels near Aiken House, where the Oak Creek internment camp used to be. She feels like she's on the brink of screaming, which means that someone is going to die soon. Void Styles taunts her and says that she can feel Styles dying the longer they're separated. The sheriff has a conversation with Deputy Parrish, who says that he was drawn here and that he's not concerned about the murder statistics in town. This is a wild thing to say considering just how many deputies have already died, but his whole statement about being drawn here is such an obvious hint you'd think it came with a sign. Styles shows up at the police station, and after confirming with Scott that he's real, the sheriff and Styles embrace. Cue the tears. In their following conversation, Styles realizes they might be able to find Lydia if they use another banshee, so they go to visit Meredith in Aiken House and try to get her to tell them where she could be. They figure she's a banshee because she screamed a lot when she was sent to Aiken House, and she has a tendency to hear things. When they get there, they find that Meredith has escaped. Ethan and Aiden are looking for Lydia in the woods when they're shot full of wolfsbane bullets. It's not the Argents, so who could it be? Derek shows up and helps them get away, and they hide in the coyote den. They go to the loft later, and Derek shows Argent the shells from the bullets that were fired at them. Argent recognizes them immediately. Meredith shows up at the school, so they bring her back to Scott's house to get the information they need from her. She says that Lydia doesn't want to be found, but she also gives them a clue that leads them to Lydia at Oak Creek. Allison prepares for the upcoming battle, and her dad tells her it's time to graduate to full-blown hunter. They make some silver arrowheads with the Argent symbol pressed into them. Noshiko shows up at Oak Creek, intending to stop the Nogitsune herself with all of her Oni, But her plan fails miserably as the Oni get close to Void Styles and he breaks the dagger he took from her. Because they were so close, it both summons another stronger Oni and makes them all switch to his side. Noshiko is now basically useless, but Scott, Allison, Isaac, Kira, and Styles show up to help. The Oni fight our characters, and just as it seems they're going to lose, Allison fires one of her silver arrowheads into an Oni's chest, killing it. It's not clear why, but it worked. Unfortunately, a different Oni immediately stabs Allison through the chest. The fight breaks for a moment as Allison dies in Scott's arms. It's quite sad, really, and it just reminds me of how good Crystal Reed is at playing sad and fake crying. Before she dies, she starts to tell Scott that he needs to tell her dad something, but before she can explain what it is, she dies. That's officially our first major character death. This episode is great, and that part I'm always harping on about happens here. The two villains officially come together and end up working together. It's like how Gerard takes control of the Kanema in Season 2, but so much better since the Nogitsune and the Oni are both already connected through Noshiko. It's definitely the closest connection we've had yet for our two villains, and this season really benefits from it. We'll talk a little about Allison's death later, so I won't go into it in depth here, but in short, I think it's done very well. Kind of unfortunate that she's dating Isaac here, but declares her love for Scott instead as she dies, but oh well. In our season finale, all the characters are forced to pretend that Allison was killed by masked intruders. They still can't figure out how Allison was able to kill an Oni either. Even though she isn't in the picture anymore, Isaac sticks around Argent. It's sweet. At the sheriff's station, as they're trying to prepare their story for the deputies, the Oni show up and kill another one. At Derek's loft, Aiden declares that he's ready to leave Beacon Hills, and Ethan agrees, though he wants to take Danny with him. Aww. Derek schools them about all the lessons he's learned about Scott's morality in the last few seasons. Dr. Deaton tells the gang that the Nematon may not be strong enough to contain the Nogitsune anymore, so they need to find another way to hold it. Lydia immediately suggests the cylindrical jar that had Talia Hale's claws in it, since it was made from the wood of the Nematon. Void Styles shows up at the hospital with the Oni and starts killing people left and right. Everyone the Oni attack have black smoke coming out of their wounds, which seems to imply that Void Styles is able to draw power from their pain. It also helps to kill them slowly. Argent and Isaac have a heart-to-heart, and they realize that Allison was able to kill the Oni because the silver from her arrowhead was stuck in the Oni's body. It's similar to how Argent was able to break an Oni's mask with a silver bullet way back when. They grab all the silver they have and bring it with them. At the school where the final showdown will take place, Styles tells the others that if they need to kill him to stop the Nogitsune, then they should. Scott is not okay with that plan. As they enter, they walk into a hallucination of a Japanese garden in the snow, and Void Styles and the Oni start to cut them up. They aren't able to make any ground, but Styles realizes that it's a hallucination and they make it through. Outside the school, Derek, Aiden, and Ethan fight some Oni of their own. Derek passes the Nematon box off to Isaac and tells him to bring it to Scott. They're able to trick Void Styles, and Scott bites him on the arm. Because he changes the body of the host, in a sense, by turning him into a werewolf, Void Styles starts to die. Just as he starts to fall, Kira also stabs him through the chest for good measure. A fly comes out of his mouth, which Isaac catches in the Nematon box, and Void Styles disintegrates. Aiden gets skewered right around when the Oni disappear, and while all of the Oni's victims are healing from their smoking wounds, Aiden isn't able to hold on and dies in his brother's arms. This might be the saddest death in the series, in my opinion. It's so heart-wrenching to watch one twin cry over the other, like that would actually be traumatic to film. Thankfully, Styles immediately starts to feel a little better, so all the murdering they just did to Void Styles did not affect him much. We get a final roundup like we do in each season finale and see where our characters are ending off for now. Isaac leaves with Argent, and we don't know this yet, but they're going off to France. Argent will return, but this is the last we see of Isaac. They have the Nematon box too, which might be relevant much later. Most of the characters are back at school, and we see Malia being shown around by Coach. She's about to become a much more important character. Ethan and Danny break up, but we find out that Danny knew about werewolves this whole time.
You knew? Dude, it's Beacon Hills.
This is also the last we see of Danny, which really sucks. As the season ends, Derek sits in the locker room speaking to Styles. He asks Styles about his nightmares and how he knows if they're real or not. He's been having some nightmares of his own, and he isn't sure what's real and what's not. As he realizes he is in a dream, he wakes up to see none other than Kate Argent, who is revealed to be the owner of those bullet shells from earlier. And it's revealed that the time Peter slashed her throat in the season 1 finale actually just turned her into a were-creature. This time a were-jaguar. but we'll have to wait till next season for that. This episode is great, and it's one of my favorite finales for sure. I already said I'm a big fan of when the main characters trick the bad guys rather than just dominating them with force, so this was good. Stiles, Scott, and Lydia all contributed this time too, which was nice. So yeah, this is definitely the best season of the show. Everyone knows it. Most people tend to be talking about 3B when they say that, but if we look at season 3 as a whole, there really is no question that it stands a little bit higher than the rest. I don't think this necessarily has anything to do with the increased budget or the fact they moved the production to California, since later seasons have those benefits too and don't quite compare. I just think that this is when the writers and the cast were at their peak. Everyone really gave it their all, and it definitely helps a little that the second half gave an opportunity for Dylan O'Brien to flex his acting abilities a little. I can't even pin it solely on that though, because he has a similar opportunity in the 6th season, and that one is pretty universally panned. It really does just seem to have a perfect storm of all the good things this show had going for it. The best villains, the best writing, the best new additions, the best period. I'm sure it comes to no surprise that this season ranks at number 1 on my ranking. If I was ranking them separately, they'd both be above season 2 here, but I'd probably place 3B just a little higher than 3A, even though I think the Alpha Pack and the Duroc are stronger villains than the Nogitsune and the Oni/Kira's mom. The Nogitsune is absolutely up there for best villain in the series, don't get it twisted, but Kira's mom is only sort of a villain, so it comes down a little bit, and 3A does get a chance to bump itself up. Ultimately, this doesn't really change the ranking though. If we take a look at things I've been keeping track of, Derek did quite well in 3B and didn't die once, so we have a Derek dies counter of 3 for the entire series so far. Pretty much 1 per season. I wonder how he'll fare in season 4. Looking at our core cast members, they're all alive by the end of the season with the exception of Allison. She's dead, but we'll see her again in flashbacks, and her actress makes a fun cameo in season 5, so we won't give her that white X for now. We can add Kira to our list here as a main character since we'll be seeing more of her for the next few seasons. This is also the last time we'll be seeing quite a few characters, like Isaac, who unceremoniously dips out for the rest of the series. It's also time to say goodbye to Danny, who for some reason just no longer appears. The actor, Keahu Kahuanui, said once that he was confused when he was not asked to return, but when we see how many other characters on this list also get the axe, I guess we can just assume they were looking to shift some things around moving forward. We can add Malia though, and she'll be a regular moving forward, and I love Shelly Hennig, so this is great. We have our villains as usual, and I'm going to put the Nogitsune here as blue, since while it's defeated and gone, it is technically alive in that Nematon box, and we may or may not see it later. And with the return of Kate, we get both of our season 1 villains back from the dead due to their fan favorite status, just in time for Jill Wagner on Wolf Watch. This is the last time we see Ethan for quite a while. Aiden also gets a white X even though he appears in hallucinations in season 5, but the character is well and truly dead, so all our parents that were alive at the beginning of the season are still kicking, and both of our fan guest character appearances are alive too. This is the last time we'll be seeing either of them, so they get the X unfortunately. It's a shame, they were both fun. I'll put our Eichenhaus characters here too, and Oliver gets the blue tag since it's never outright confirmed if he lived or died, but we never see him again so it doesn't really matter too much. Lots of victims this half of the season as well, and I'm going to place Void Styles here as a separate character since he had his own body, and also because he's a fan favorite. I'm including Styles' mom as well since she is in a handful of deleted scenes, though we won't really see her properly for another few seasons and she will be played by a different actress. Plus, with all the information we get about her this season, it just seems like a shame not to include her. All in all, more death than the first half of the season, but it's done to fewer characters with names. Easily the biggest body count of the series so far though. These baddies really know how to kill. Scott in season 3 suffers a little from the fact that so much of 3B is about Styles. He has his moments in 3A, including that whole true alpha thing, but by the time the season is over, most people are too focused on Styles to remember all of the development that Scott has. Par for the course, I guess. I've said it before, but Scott gets a bad rep. People tend to find his self-righteousness and his insistence not to kill anyone annoying, but I think that's one of his most redeeming traits. It's what sets him apart from literally every other werewolf on the show. None of the other wolves are as willing to try to save everyone, and even most of the human characters are okay with killing every now and then. I don't understand how people look on this as such a bad thing, as if Scott isn't usually right in the end, at least so far. His whole insistence against killing is part of why they don't just kill Styles in the first place, and I bet if they did that, people would hate on him even more. The Scott that starts 3A and the Scott that finishes 3B are quite distinct in their own way too. Scott has some sit-downs with his mom and some of his other mentors throughout the season, and you can tell he's internalizing these conversations because when we see him in season 4, he keeps this attitude, unlike some other shows that have character development and then just drop it because it's inconvenient. Allison's departure is a big event at the end of this season too. From the beginning, Crystal Reed was the oldest of the core cast, even more so than Tyler Hoechlin who plays Derek, even if it's just by a few years. Part of why she wanted to leave the show is because she didn't want to get stuck with high school roles, and also because she'd lined up a part in a new series that unfortunately never really got picked up, even if it was pretty good. But unlike Jackson, they decided to take a more final hit with her character and kill her off rather than just make her move away. I don't hate this, since it would have been incredibly weird for them to try to write her off as moving away or something, considering how critical her character has been with the show. It was weird with Jackson, and she's easily 2 or 3 times more important than him. Instead, we have a departure that leaves a lasting effect on the characters for the rest of the series, and I'm ignoring the movie for a minute here when I say that I think it's handled well moving forward. With the exception of Lydia in season 4, who pretty much never even mentions Allison, they don't just forget that she was here, and it's mostly seen in Scott and of course Mr. Argent. Shame that Isaac leaves too, since I'm sure her loss would have been relevant to his future plots. Lydia has her time to shine in season 3A, which I love. I sort of dubbed her as the focus character for that half of the season. She's waited long enough to get her appreciation, and I hate that she's sort of relegated to the side again in 3B, just when we were making progress. I hate when characters are just designated as love interests and sidelined in favor of their partner's development, which unfortunately is how Lydia goes for most of the rest of the season. She's there, sure, but she's really more around to hint at future Stydia and support the others. Can't wait for her more active presence in the 4th season. Derek remains my favorite, which is no surprise, but he doesn't get a lot to do this season. 3A has a little bit, which is nice, but he's more focused on the non-character that is Cora than he is to have any real development himself. His big push in 3A is that he's considered selfish for ignoring the bigger problems in favor of his family, but who can blame the guy? They all died in a fire that he says is his fault, and then he finally gets one back that isn't Peter. If I was in his place, I would not want to let her go either. Too bad she moves to South America. In 3B, they show his growth from this by having him speak with his dead mother, even though we don't see it, and he resolves to protect the entire town. He even sort of makes amends with Chris, who is the one Argent that isn't actually responsible for all the horrible shit in his life. I love and hate this since their dynamic is great, but it further pushes Derek into the parent half of the show's dynamic, which I think goes against the entire point of his character. The age retcon does this too, and it adds a non-steric reason that I hate that too, other than how it ruins an already messed up timeline. He's supposed to be part of the teenaged group. That's the whole point. He's barely older, but he's still decidedly young enough to be like an older brother to Scott and act as a mentor. He doesn't need an adult mentor. He's already got his mom to do the parenting, and he's got Deaton to do the rest. He's supposed to have people closer to his own age to help him, and there aren't any other supernaturals that can fill that role if Derek doesn't. Now that they've officially retconned him a few years older, and they'll add a few more years next season, he's pushed past fitting in with the teens and retroactively tarnished his previous action. For example, his insistence to hang around teenagers and his weird connection with Erica are not as creepy if he's close to their age. It is a little bit since he's still an adult, but it's much less creepy if he's supposed to be 19 and not 25 or 26. It affects his older brother relationship with Isaac, which sort of he ruins in 3A anyway, and it makes his lack of knowledge or experience with things so much lamer. When he's a little younger, you can pass off his inexperience and bad decisions as someone who just justifiably doesn't know better, but when it's a grown man, it just makes him look completely incompetent. I love Derek, but this season ain't it for him. If you're still holding out on liking him, hopefully season 4 will change your mind. The best new addition to the cast, in my opinion, is Kira. She fits in immediately with the rest of them, but she also stands out enough that she doesn't feel redundant. In a way, Boyd always sort of filled a similar role as Isaac in that they were both new betas for Derek and sort of just tagged along with whoever needed them in their first season. But Kira doesn't really fill in for anyone. She stepped into Allison's old role as a love interest for Scott, but she's not a copy-paste, and in my opinion, she's much more interesting. They both have parents that are relevant to the villain plot for their season, but Noshiko's motivations and backstory have always felt so much more understandable than the Argents. The Argents hunt werewolves because they can, and it's expected of them out of some moral code, but Noshiko has personal wrongs that she feels the need to right, and while they both drag their kids into the mess, Kira comes out the other side much more different than her mother, while Allison is kind of more of an echo of her father. Plus, she's got a sword instead of a bow and lightning powers. It might be a jump up from the shifters in season 1 and 2, but the kitsune fit really well into the show, and I like their inclusion. We'll talk a little more about the tricksters in a second, but first I want to bring up Isaac. I like Isaac a lot, and admittedly a lot of that comes from projected opinions and fandom, But especially with the few episodes when he's out of commission in 3B, I do find Isaac's inclusion in this entire season to be mostly unnecessary. Hear me out for a sec. As I said, he and Boyd have a very similar purpose when they're introduced, but Boyd is the one in Season 3 who has the proper impact. He's the one whose death is monumental to Derek's development, which sucks, but that's neither here nor there. And aside from being Allison's love interest before her death, he doesn't really do anything in 3A or 3B that couldn't have been filled in by another character. Derek's protectiveness from the Alpha Pack? He's already more worried about Cora, a werewolf to follow Scott around? Both Ethan and Aiden do that for most of 3B. Someone to work alongside Argent and Allison? Well, Allison has Lydia and Argent gets Derek at the end of the season when Isaac is busy with Scott anyways. While I love him, I just think that people tend to see his backstory and the actor and do exactly what I do and project ideas onto him rather than looking at what he offers to the show. When he gets electrocuted and ends up in the hospital for more than an entire episode, he's hardly missed. It's like they needed an excuse to let Daniel Sharman skip an episode. The fact that he leaves at the end of the season doesn't help since we never see him again. And it's not even mentioned why he doesn't come back. At least with Jackson, they tried to joke about him moving to England as part of an American Werewolf in London joke, but when Argent comes back in the next season, they don't even acknowledge that he just dumped Isaac in France. And when the Nematon jar comes back in the movie, it's not even with Isaac or in France anyway. While we're here, I want to touch briefly on Parrish because it relates to Isaac. It is often believed, whether from popular fan theory or from alleged leaks from the show, that Parrish was originally intended to be Isaac's older brother Camden reincarnated. Camden is stated in the second season to have died in combat, and Parrish shows up in 3B with a past as a bomb squad member in Afghanistan and a mysterious draw that leads him to town. They don't interact, and spoilers, but the future explanation that we get for Parrish does mention that he actually died in combat only to be used as the host for a supernatural creature. If he was intended to be Isaac's brother, this backstory would still work, albeit I assume his memory of being Isaac's brother would have been blown up too. Because Isaac leaves the show for good, does this mean they did the same thing as the alleged Jackson and Peter plotline and just dropped it or shuffled it around? I mean, it really is all unconfirmed, but I like to think that there wasn't any connection. If this is really what they were building to, I would have expected Isaac to mention his brother at least once this season, since it's such a blink and you miss it mention in the second season. Plus, the way Parrish's whole story works out is fine with me. More on that in the Season 4 and Season 5 videos when I have time to make them. I also want to touch on Malia. A friend of mine told me once that as soon as the show introduced were-coyotes, she checked out completely and gave up on the show. As if one other kind of were-creature was too much, considering what comes later. It didn't really occur to me until writing this video, but the inclusion of Malia as a coyote is entirely deliberate. We hear about different tricksters all throughout the season, and while it focuses on foxes because, one of the tricksters that's often overlooked are coyotes. I judged the first few episodes of 3B a little harshly because they don't really build on the upcoming plot, but having Malia be a were-coyote rather than just a werewolf is a clever way to introduce the tricksters while also diversifying the kinds of creatures we see moving forwards. Another trickster are ravens, but we don't really get to see those in Teen Wolf, so I guess they get a pass. If I was writing this show, I probably would have alluded to someone who could have taken the raven-like role, even if it wasn't necessarily a shifter. Like maybe the Oni designs could have incorporated some kind of feather in its cloak, or the masks could have been slightly bird-like. Malia herself doesn't really do anything trickstery now or in the future, but other were-coyotes do, so I'm sticking with this analysis. I already mentioned my feelings on the whole Eichenhaus event with Malia, and she doesn't do much else, so I think we're ready to move on to the big one. I'm sure you've been waiting for it. Stiles and Void Stiles by extension are a highlight of this season, yes. He's great in 3A and his new slightly longer hair does wonders for him, but 3B is where he really shines. I already praised the Nogitsune for just how competent it is as a villain, and Stiles himself gets so much more development and backstory in this season compared to the previous two. We learn more about his mother, we learn some of his childhood, and we have that mildly confusing moment where he might think he's bisexual. And ultimately, we see how even though he's willing to do underhanded things, in the end he is completely willing to sacrifice himself if it means saving the people around him. We might come back to this when we get to the movie if I remember, so don't hold your breath for now. Dylan O'Brien's acting is also just so good. Most of the cast is good in general, and there are standout moments from many other characters, but Dylan O'Brien really gives it every single time. The face acting when he shifts between Stiles and Void Stiles is chilling. They knew from the first 2 seasons that Stiles was the most popular character, and they did exactly what people wanted and made him the focus for 3B, which is probably the smartest decision they ever make. This actually isn't the highest rated season by critics, as it comes under both Season 2 and Season 5 for some reason, but it is the highest rated by fans, so clearly this decision paid off. Now that we've covered the individual characters, let's look at them all together. We have more ships than usual since the cast is starting to grow, so I'll try to keep this brief. To start, we have the canon relationships. First is Scott and Allison, which I've never had a problem with, but it doesn't get much good in Season 3. Allison switches over to Isaac, and in 3B, Scott has Kira, so they've pretty much moved on. They do have that mildly confusing moment at the end of the season where she confesses her forever love for him, but she dies right away, so we'll have to put a pin in this one until the movie. Allison and Isaac is fine too. Isaac fits really well with the Argents, and while I criticize him for being sort of unnecessary in this season, it does work for him to have this arc. Scott was never really able to fit in with the Argents, so it helps make him different and not just another werewolf for Allison to date. I know people tend to hate Allison, and maybe her taking Isaac off the table is part of why, but they're fine. I also really like they emphasize and reiterate near the end that when they slept together, it was not under the influence of the nogitsune. Wish we could have said that about other couples. Hey, it's other couples. Styles and Malia is fine too, and this season is really just a start for them. She hasn't had much time to be a real character, but for the dynamic they have in the Icon House episode, before they maybe sleep together, is fun. It's different than the one he has with Lydia, and it's a little different than the one he didn't get to have with Erica or Cora, so points there. Malia in general sort of picks up the slack from the last two failed attempts to give Styles a girlfriend, so hopefully they can try to stick the landing this time. I love Danny and Ethan together, and I wish we got more involvement from Danny. That's kind of a complaint I have about the first 3 seasons in general, since Danny is fun and it would have been nice to have a more prominent gay character, but I'm kind of a sucker for brutes that get softened a little by their affection for someone else, and that's exactly what we get with these two. Scott and Kira are good too, and they are definitely my favorite pairing when it comes to Scott relationships. From the very beginning, you get the sense that he's actually interested in befriending her, and he's concerned for her before they're really friends, but he's not overtly wolfy like he was about it with Allison. The scenes with the two of them in Kira's room are always great, and I especially like that she confides with him about her kitsune theories before she even knows he's a werewolf. It's sweet, and I like it. I'll throw Styles and Lydia in here with the canon relationships, even though they aren't together yet, because they really lay it on thick that they're getting there eventually. I sort of hate the locker room kiss when she stops his panic attack, which I know is a very polarizing moment. It seems you either love it or hate it. Lydia is also the one to partner up with Styles for his sacrifice, and she joins in with Scott when they go to rescue him from his mine. Big points there. Next, we can take a look at our non-canon relationships. First, Sheriff Stilinski and Melissa McCall gets their once per video shout out. The fact that Styles calls her mom here and there helps, and there's still some good bonding with Scott and the sheriff too. So they're sort of like a family unit already. The conversations between them in the Nematon root cellar is fun as well. Wish there was more of that. I'll give a special mention to Scott and Isaac, since Isaac moves in with him in 3A, and they pair together really well. Whenever they have scenes together, they play off each other perfectly, and I love how protective Isaac gets over Scott's mom when she's in danger in 3A as well. Like with the previous couple, I really buy into it as a family, and since there's no paternal connection, I guess that means Isaac marries in. Shame that would make him related to Agent McCall. There's also a respectable ship for Malia and Kira, but they don't even interact this season, so I'll go more into that in the Season 4 video. At the risk of repeating the points I make in my Steric video, I do happen to be quite a big fan of Styles and Derek. By this point, they've really made it clear outside of the show that it's probably not going to happen, so the moments between them are just fan service. Nice points to jump into fanfiction from, but ultimately whatever. This is the season with the alleged girl Derek and both alleged girl Styles, but for more details on that, I recommend checking out the Steric video. Since I've gotten into the habit of ranking these things, this is how I would rank the relationships in this season, both canon and non-canon. I'm probably going to have to find a different way to show this in the later seasons, since we're going to get a bunch new characters to replace all the ones that keep leaving the show. Right around now is when I would usually talk about the structure of the season, and how well it's set up with its villains and characters, but I've covered pretty much everything I could possibly say about that in each episode as we went along. This is where I'll have to ask you for your opinion. If you've seen the show, is this your favorite season as well, or are you more into the darkness we're heading into? Let me know in the comments. Overall, there isn't really anywhere to go from here except downhill. We've already established this season as the best, so it's sort of just a race for the bottom at this point, but I'm sure that comes as no surprise. For all you people who like the whole thing bad content, I'm sure the next few season videos will make you very happy. If you liked this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and maybe even share with a friend who likes Teen Wolf. We're just getting this thing off the ground, and I can't wait for you to see what's coming next. At the risk of alienating the few of you who have watched each video, I will be posting some shorter videos in between these remaining episodes. Despite how it seems, this is not just a Teen Wolf channel. I know the previous video had some discussion about Steric as it related to queerbaiting, so be sure to check that one out as well. If you're a fan of K-pop at all, there are also going to be more videos about 17 coming up, and the ones that are already posted are pretty fun in my opinion. And for fans of general queer stuff, there is lots more of that coming. Until next time.